Okay, y'all are live. I'm gonna make you host and then y'all are good to start.
All right, do we have any pretrial matters from the plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening. Before we begin with pretrial matters, may we first make appearances before the court?
Yeah, please do.
Thank you, Your Honor. Hello, my name is Aaron Turner, and along with my co-counsel, Faith Blank, and Ricky Hewitt, we will be representing the estate of Genesis Petrillo in today's case. Would Your Honor like opposing counsel to make appearances before I continue?
Sure, yeah, let's do it that way.
Good evening, Your Honor. May we begin with appearances?
Yes.
My name is Kimberly Chappell, and I, along with my co-counsels Veda Sai.
Good evening, Your Honor.
And Brandon Pack.
Good evening, Your Honor.
Good evening.
Represent the defense, Harper Martini.
Hello.
Defending against the cause of action of battery.
All right, thank you. Now I think we can do some pretrial matters from the plaintiff.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, may we confirm that Your Honor has received copies of the Midlands Rules of Evidence, any relevant case law, stipulations, pretrial orders, special instructions, and jury instructions?
Yes, I have a bench book here that I believe includes all that. If I am having any particular trouble finding a certain document, I'll rely on y'all, but I don't think that'll be necessary.
Thank you, Your Honor. At this time, we would like to invoke Rule 615, that is the constructive sequestration of all witnesses.
Any objections to that?
No objections. We just simply ask that the party representative, Harper Martini, be allowed to stay in court.
Sounds good. And what about from the plaintiff? Do y'all have a party representative?
We do not, Your Honor.
All right, so everybody except for Harper Martini will be sequestered.
Additionally, Your Honor, may we assume pursuant to Rule 603 that all witnesses have been pre-sworn in before testifying?
Yes.
Furthermore, may we also assume that all objection arguments are heard constructively outside of the earshot of the jury?
Yeah, that's fine.
We would also like to ask your preference in regards to screen sharing and turning on our cameras for objection arguments.
I guess I'm not sure what the options are. I would like for cameras to be on if people are talking. Is that, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking more specifically.
That works for us. We just wanted to make sure that we were doing something that you were expecting of us, so that we will do that.
Okay. If I don't like something, I'll tell y'all and you can adjust.
Thank you, Your Honor. We would also like to ask your preference as to whether we may assume that material concerned in like sustained objections has been stricken, or should we move to strike upon a sustained objection?
You can assume that it's been stricken.
Thank you, Your Honor. Lastly, Your Honor, while asking evidentiary foundation questions, may we assume the witnesses constructively has a copy before we screen share the evidence?
Yes.
Thank you. At this time, Your Honor, I would also like to point out that exhibits 1 through 10 have been pre-admitted at a previous hearing.
So 1 through 10, do you agree with that defense?
Yes, Your Honor.
Then with that, Your Honor, the plaintiff has no further housekeeping matters and is ready to proceed.
All right. Defense, do you have any pretrial matters?
We would just like to clarify what Your Honor's preferences is regarding permission to share a screen.
Regarding what was that again?
Permission to share our screen. So do we have to ask for permission?
Okay, yeah, this might have been what you were getting at. You can ask before something will be shown to the jury, but I understand that I'm seeing stuff. You can screen share. But once you want the jury to be seeing something, ask to show it to the jury, even though you're still just going to be screen sharing. Does that make sense?
Yes, Your Honor. With that, the defense is ready to proceed.
All right. If there's nothing further, let's move into opening statements from the plaintiff.
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court. I will make you disappear. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, in the summer of 2019, Harper Martini had a problem. A problem that the defendant liked to call Genesis Petrillo. But to Genesis's loved ones, she was anything but a problem. In fact, in today's hearing, you will hear from her fiance, Casey Soto, about how Genesis, or Jen, as Casey knew her, was the love of his life. You will hear about how happy they were together. You will hear about how they had a plan to make a new life together. And then you will have to hear, unfortunately, about how that happy dream came crashing down to earth. You see, the defendant in today's case, Casey Soto's mother, never quite got along with Jen. And you will hear about how that relationship got worse and worse and worse until on the night before Casey and Jen were to be wed, the defendant placed organophosphate pesticide, deadly poison, in a bottle of wine and gave it to Genesis, ensuring that Jen and only Jen would drink it. You will hear from Angel Rodriguez, a friend who was with the couple for almost the whole night, about how what should have been one of the happiest nights of Jen's life went horribly, horribly wrong. You will hear about how after drinking the wine, Jen became incoherent, how her words began to slur and she began to vomit uncontrollably, her body dripping with sweat as her skin flushed bright crimson red. You will hear also the desperation that Angel felt as her friend got sicker and sicker, and you will hear that Jen's last words to her dear friend were 911. You will hear also about how Angel did just that. In desperation, she called the emergency services, and you will hear today about how the first responders came and performed CPR on Jen's body, lying there limp on the floor of the Peony Estates bathroom. And then you will hear from Dr. Jimin Kwan, the emergency room physician from that night. You will hear about the deadly struggle for Jen's life. You will hear about how Dr. Kwan tested Jen's body and found organophosphate as the most likely cause of her condition. You will hear about how the doctor tested the contents of Jen's stomach and found wine laced with organophosphate pesticide. And then you will hear how after learning all this, the doctor tried to administer an antidote, but was just too late. Janet Hardy slipped into a coma and died early on the morning of what should have been the happiest day of her life. And just like that, Harper's problem was gone. She'd made it disappear. Now, to hold the defendant accountable in today's case, we, the plaintiff, are pursuing a complaint of civil battery. Here in the state of Midlands, that means that we, the plaintiff, must prove to you, the jury, 3 things. First, an act. Second, harmful intent. And third, harmful contact. You will hear today about how Harper Martini placed organophosphate pesticide in a bottle of wine and gave it to Genesis Petrillo to drink. That's an act. You will hear about how Harper Martini repeatedly wished that Genesis Petrillo would get out of her son's life and is quoted as saying, "I will make you disappear." That's intent. And then you will hear today about how Genesis Petrillo died as a result of that organophosphate poisoning. And I think any one of you would agree that that is harmful contact. Now, we, the plaintiff, have to prove that to you to a slightly different standard of evidence than you might be expecting. You see, the standard in civil court is actually by a preponderance of the evidence. And what that means for you is that we, the plaintiff, must prove what we allege is more likely than not to be true. That's a 50 plus 1%, just a 51% certainty. And I want you to keep that in mind. I want you to remember that, and I want you to remember that what we're looking for here is the most likely explanation. And I want you to remember one more thing. Genesis Petrillo lying there alone on her wedding day. Because the defense is going to come up and they're going to try and tell you a story. And it might be creative. It might be fantastical. But I want you to remember that we're not looking for creativity. We're not looking for the fantastical. We're looking for the facts. And the fact of the matter in today's case is that the most likely explanation of what happened is the defendant made her problem disappear. and you have to hold them accountable for that. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Opening statement for the defense.
Yes, Your Honor. May I begin?
You may.
Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury, may it please the court. Family comes first. This was the motto that Harper Martini lives by. Now, Miss Martini was a single parent that simply wanted the best for her only child, Casey. She even started her own bed and breakfast winery called the Peony Estates in order to keep both herself and her son afloat. June 8th, 2019 was the day that Miss Martini's son was getting married to the love of his life, Genesis Petrillo. However, in an unfortunate accident, Genesis fell ill and passed away the morning of the wedding. Now, the plaintiff will talk to you about how Miss Martini intentionally poisoned Genesis, but you'll soon learn today that their allegations all fall short. What happened to Genesis is a tragedy, but tragedy does not mean battery. The plaintiff is suing Harper Martini for battery, but they must prove to you 3 elements. First, they have to prove that a harmful act happened to Genesis. Second, they must prove that Harper Martini committed that act. And lastly, the plaintiff must prove to you that Harper Martini intentionally committed that act. Members of the jury, the plaintiff also has a burden to prove in this case, as they must prove their case by the preponderance of the evidence. Now, just a moment ago, the plaintiff told you that as long as they meet 51%, they've met their burden. But what they have not told you is that they start at 0%, and they must prove today, they must build today's case with facts, evidence. So at the end of today's trial, if you believe our story ever so slightly more than their story, they have not met their burden. Now, in contrast, we as a defense, we don't have to prove to you a single thing because we have no burden. Yet we still called 3 witnesses to testify on the stand today. First, you'll hear from our medical expert, and he'll testify about all of the possibilities that were overlooked by the doctor that treated Genesis in the hospital. Our next witness is the head winemaker at Peony Estates, someone who's worked with Miss Martini, someone who's known Miss Martini for a number of years. She'll testify about how much love Miss Martini had for both her son and her winery, and that she would never, Miss Martini would never intentionally poison Genesis. Lastly, you'll hear from Harper Martini herself. She'll testify that her relationship with Genesis was not perfect by any means, but she was still looking forward to welcoming Genesis into the family because Miss Martini wanted her son to be happy with the love of his life. Because family comes first. Now, at the end of today's case, my co-counsel, Ms. Tsai, will ask you to weigh all of the evidence and find our client, Harper Martini, not liable for battery. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Plaintiff want to call your first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff calls Casey Soto to the stand.
Ms. Soto, you can take the stand.
May I proceed?
You may.
Good evening, Mr. Soto. Would you please introduce yourself to the court?
Of course. Hi, my name is Casey Soto.
What do you do for a living?
Right now, not much. Just focused on getting through each day.
Mr. Soto, I understand that testifying today might be very difficult for you. And if at any point you need to stop and take a break, please just let me know.
Thank you.
I want to start with talking about your relationship with both your fiance and your mother. When did you first meet Genesis Petrillo?
Well, we met at a party in 2012, and I know this is going to sound so Hollywood, but it was love at first sight, and we were dating by the end of the month, and we were inseparable.
Did you introduce Genesis to your mom right away?
No, my mother, she could be a lot to be around, so it took me a while, till about 2015, before I actually brought Genesis into the picture.
What do you mean by she could be a lot to be around?
You have to understand, my mother, she would regularly tell me that I'm everything that she has left, and that I'm going to take over the family business. So I'm sure that you understand bringing some new person into the equation that might take me away was a scary proposition for my mother.
Can you be a little bit more specific about your relationship with your mother?
My mom, she always wanted what she thought was best for me. And, when I first went to college.
Improper character evidence. May I be heard?
You may.
Pursuant to Rule 404B, the statements previously made by the witness shows a conformity therewith, therefore is improper character evidence.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Yes, I would rather not the screen sharing of the rules of evidence. So thanks for doing that, but I'm good. So you're arguing action and conformity under 404B in your response.
Yes, Your Honor. We are not using this to establish that Harper Martini had a propensity to want what was best for her son, but rather to characterize their relationship in this moment when she first met Genesis Petrillo, which would explain her reaction to meeting Genesis.
Response.
May I respond? By saying that the defendant had always wanted what was best for her son, it shows it shows a conformity therewith. In other words, that because she always wanted what was best for her son at this time, that means she must have wanted what was best for her son the day of. Therefore, it means that the alleged poisoning must have taken place. However, that's improper character evidence because of the fact we cannot show conformity therewith.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yeah, and could you tailor your response? So you're saying that you're not offering it in conformity. You're just offering it for what she thought back then.
If I may proffer.
Sure, and I'd like to hear why what she thought back then is relevant to what we're deciding today, if not for conformity. And you can respond how you like.
Yes, Your Honor. This information is going to provide context for, if I may proffer, the relationship between Genesis Petrillo and Harper Martini, specifically the first interaction that they had when Harper met Genesis, why Harper may have acted the way that she did. We're not going to ask this witness about whether or not that dedication to Casey continued into the future, but my next question will be specifically about the meeting between Genesis Petrillo and Harper Martini in 2015.
I'm going to sustain the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Soto, when did Harper and Genesis first meet?
It was 2015, just after my mother first opened Peony Estates.
How did that meeting go?
Honestly, not great. Jen asked my mother if Harper had any classier wine than what my mother had brought out, and my mother got irrationally angry about that.
Objection, hearsay.
What was the objection?
Hearsay. May I be heard?
You may.
Specifically in regards to the statement where Genesis asked the defendant on whether or not she had any classier wine. That is hearsay.
May I respond, Your Honor? Yes. Questions are not assertions. They have no inherent truth value. Therefore, they cannot be offered for the truth of the matter asserted and are not hearsay.
Last response from the defense.
Then I'd like to amend my objection to one of relevance. If we're not offering this for the truth of the matter asserted, then why? Then it does not make the fact of the matters of the case more or less probable.
I'm going to overrule that objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Soto, would you like me to repeat my question?
Please.
Can you tell us more specifically about that first interaction between Jen and your mother?
Yeah, after Jen had asked my mother if my mother had any classier wine, my mom got pretty upset, and it was not the prettiest sight.
Did Jen and your mother's relationship improve after that?
I don't think so. I'm not sure that my mother ever got over the comment. She would regularly say things like, Jen didn't respect her work, or Jen didn't respect her as a person. It was really not productive to find a compromise between them.
Mr. Soto, I want to move on and talk about your wedding. When were you and Genesis Petrillo engaged?
It was the best day of my life. It was July 18th, 2018. Jen actually, she proposed to me. She beat me to it by a day, but frankly, I didn't even care. We were just so in love, and that's all that matters, right?
Did you have any plans with Genesis after your wedding?
Well, Jen had gotten a job offer in Paris, and we were going to move to France. We kind of wanted to keep that close to the vest, though, because I didn't want my dad to find, or my mother to find out and react adversely to the news.
Did Harper ever find out about this?
Unfortunately, despite my best efforts, Jen, she left my mother this voicemail and spilled our secret.
What specifically did Jen tell your mother in this voicemail?
That we were moving to France and that I was not going to be living in Midlands anymore.
How did Harper respond to this?
Just like I expected, she was angry, she was upset, and she actually...
Objection, speculation.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes, please.
This witness was there for the interaction. If I may proffer, he's about to testify specifically to an argument that he had with his mother about this. Therefore, he would definitely be able to tell that she was feeling angry.
So one thing, for future reference, since we're outside the earshot of the jury, you don't have to ask to proffer evidence, just argue. And as for the objection, more response from defense.
Yes, Your Honor. This is speculation because there hasn't been any foundation laid for the heated discussion between these two. Also, there's no way for the witness to know whether or not Harper was truly angry, more of that she seemed angry or looked angry, but rather she doesn't know whether or not she was angry.
So, Ms. Blank, what evidence is on the record that could be foundation again?
Specifically that Harper had heard this, and we will go into the conversation after this.
Okay. Have you laid the foundation yet that she can see or he can see her?
Yeah, he said that he was with her when she found, or afterwards he knew when she found out she told him.
Okay. Make sure you lay the foundation. I'm going to overrule for now. But yeah, try to lay that foundation before you get into statements like that. But if you do, that's all fine. Objections overruled.
Mr. Soto, how did the defendant respond after finding out that you were moving to France?
Just like I expected, she seemed pretty angry. She did something she never does, and she screamed at me. She said that I was terrible for ripping the family apart, and then she turned her rampage on Genesis.
What did she say to Genesis?
She said that whether she moved to France or Jen ended up 6 feet under, that I was staying in Midlands.
How did Genesis respond to this?
Well, understandably, she told me she was scared, that my mother was going to hurt her, and I thought that there was no way, but if only I knew.
I want to move on now to talk about your rehearsal dinner. How were interactions between you, the defendant, and Genesis Petrillo on that night?
I mean, they were the same. My mother, she even had the audacity to try and cancel the wedding. She brought up the same thing that Jen was ripping us apart, ripping the family apart, that I wasn't taking over the business. And I was so angry that someone would talk about my Jen like that.
Did Harper ever interact with Jen specifically on that night?
Yeah, after the toasts, my mother brought Jen a new vintage of peony wine called Cara, and Jen immediately poured glasses and began to drink.
Did you see anything else the evening of your rehearsal dinner?
Not much. I went to bed pretty shortly thereafter, and I kissed Jen goodnight, and I wish I knew then that it was going to be the last time I ever saw her, or I never would have let her go.
I'm so sorry, Mr. Soto. We're almost done. Do you think that your mother had reason to hurt Genesis Petrillo?
Look, I don't want to think that my only parent, my mother, is some kind of murderer.
Mr. Soto, I'm going to need you to answer my question. Do you think that your mother could have hurt Genesis Petrillo?
I don't want.
Mr. Soto, is that a yes?
My mother hated Genesis. I don't trust her.
Your Honor, at this time, we have no further questions.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Soto, do you need a minute?
I'm okay.
All right.
I'm okay.
First off, I want to offer my sincerest condolences. And if you need to take a break at any point, just let me know, okay? All right.
Thank you.
So let's talk about the wedding reception. Your mother had given Genesis a bottle of wine, is that correct?
Yeah.
And she had poured herself 2 glasses, is that correct?
She poured 2 glasses. I don't know who the second was for, but yeah, there was 2 glasses poured.
And just like you said, you don't know who the second glass was for, correct?
No, but pouring 2 glasses for yourself would be weird in rapid succession. So I don't know. I don't know.
And you had mentioned that you went to bed shortly after, is that correct?
Yes.
After you went to bed, you weren't aware of what Genesis had ate the rest of the night, correct?
I was not.
And you're not aware of what she had drank the rest of the night, correct?
I'm not.
And you don't know where your mother was the rest of the night, correct?
I don't.
And you don't know what your mother was doing the rest of the night, correct?
I was asleep. I don't know.
All right. And you and Jen had celebrated on May 11th, is that correct?
We had a pre-wedding party, just the wedding party at a Black Bear Casino on that day, yeah.
And during this time, Jen had gotten sick, correct?
We had a lot to drink, and my memory's kind of hazy, so I don't remember. I think maybe that happened, but again, I don't really remember.
But just to clarify, she had gotten sick from drinking, correct?
I don't know what she was sick from, but if my memory serves, everybody drank a lot, and she got sick, but she was fine the next morning.
And whenever we're talking about that voicemail you mentioned earlier, do you remember that voicemail?
It's one of the only things I have left of Jen's voice. How could I forget it?
Permission to tender and publish what has been pre-admitted prior to trial is Exhibit 8.
Yes.
Is this the voicemail as you last remember it?
Yes, it hurts me to read.
Has it been changed or altered in any way?
I don't think so.
And hearing this voicemail, Genesis had said to your mom, "You'll die alone at that sad place and no one will care." Is that correct?
Yeah, Jen, as I said, we had a lot to drink, and she said this. You can see it was 1:21 in the morning. And Jen apologized profusely for this, but my mother wasn't having any of it, of course.
Mr. Soto, is that a yes to my question?
Yeah.
All right. And you thought that this was a horrible thing to say, didn't you?
Yeah, and that's why Jen apologized, because it was a bad thing to say.
Mr. Soto, your mother had wanted the picture-perfect wedding, didn't she?
I'm sorry?
Your mother had wanted your wedding to be picture-perfect. Is that correct?
She had told me something like that, yeah.
And your mother was a single mother, is that correct?
Yes.
And she provided for you?
When I was younger, not anymore. Jen was out of grad school. She had a PhD. We were doing fine.
And she went to your school plays when you were younger?
Yeah, when I was like 8.
So that's a yes?
Yeah.
Okay. And she went to your soccer games?
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance.
May I respond?
Yes.
The plaintiff has already opened the door to this kind of context. We're simply rebuting it. They had opened the door talking about how Harper Martini was not the greatest mother, specifically by talking about how Harper Martini was controlling and might have harmed Casey's fiance. So this door had already been open. We're simply just refuting this argument that was already made.
May I respond?
First, how does it tie to the elements? Regardless of whatever they said that may or may not have been relevant or irrelevant if you had objected to it, maybe it would have been struck, but how does this tie to the elements?
Yes, Your Honor, it ties specifically to the first element, which is an act by the defendant. We're trying to prove that this could not have been an act by the defendant because the defendant had loved their son so much.
Okay, response.
Yes, Your Honor. And first of all, how Harper Martini's attendance at soccer games when Casey Soto was a child does not make it more or less likely that years later Harper Martini would take a specific action. But if the defense is trying to prove that, then I would amend my objection to 404 character evidence. They're attempting to prove that because she would do something nice for Casey when Casey was a child, now in the time in question, they're attempting to establish that she would act the same way.
So
may I respond?
I think I disagree with you on the first point. I'm going to overrule the relevance objection, but you can respond on the character evidence.
If I could draw the court's attention to Diebel v. Olafson and Farrell, LLP. This case talks about how anything plausibly connected to the case, whenever talking about character evidence, is allowed because of the fact that the relationship between Casey and his mother is extremely relevant to today's case.
May I respond?
So what page of the case law is this on?
It's page 5, Your Honor.
And defense, how are you saying this case law is applicable again?
Specifically, it mentions that anything plausibly related to connected to the case on hand is allowed whenever coming into contact of character evidence.
Okay. Response.
Yes, Your Honor. This case law is specifically about whether the action can be plausibly related to the actual act in question. The example they offer is a product that takes multiple years to create. Should there be an act early on in the creation of the product, it wouldn't be character evidence because it's specifically relating to the product in question. This is not just a backdoor to admit any character evidence because it has plausible relation to the case. This is not a specific action that has specific relevance to the question in today's case, the act of battery. Therefore, it is not admissible under this piece of case law.
So my understanding of the case law comports with the plaintiff's articulation. I don't think that a soccer game or soccer game attendance ties to the actual event of the battery or the murder in the way that this case law is talking about. So I'm going to sustain that.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Soto, your mother cared for you, correct?
I'd like to hope she did, not if she did something like this.
And your mother had offered to pay for your wedding, correct?
Not quite. We wanted to have the wedding at a competitor, and in order to let us have it there, she offered to pay for it. But it wasn't out of the goodness of her heart.
Mr. Soto, directing you back to my question, your mother had offered to pay for your wedding, is that correct?
Part of it in exchange for having the wedding at her venue, yes.
And you don't want to believe that she did this, correct?
I don't want to believe. I don't know what to believe.
Mr. Soto, yes or no, you do not want to believe that she did this, correct?
Of course, I don't want to believe that my mother did this.
No further questions.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor, we just asked that our witness be excused.
All right, you can be excused. And if you can give me just a few seconds to fill up my time for my ballot. All right, next witness.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff would like to call Angel Rodriguez to the stand.
You may take the stand.
May I proceed with questioning, Your Honor?
You may.
Thank you. Good evening. Could you please introduce yourself to the court?
My name is Angel Rodriguez.
Ms. Rodriguez, what do you do for a living?
I'm a kindergarten teacher at the Rapid River Valley Elementary School. And let me tell you, I just love my job and working with kids.
And what is your relationship with today's case?
I was very close with Genesis Petrillo, and I was actually supposed to be in the wedding party, but of course the wedding never actually happened.
Now, Ms. Rodriguez, what was your relationship with Genesis and Casey?
Well, we first met through a mutual friend in the summer of 2016, and the three of us, we just really hit it off. And actually, when they got engaged in 2018, Jen asked me to be her maid of honor, and I couldn't have been happier.
Now, as the maid of honor, what were you involved with in the wedding process?
Oh, I was involved a lot. I mean, as a school teacher, I just love to talk all things planning, and everything seemed to be going really smoothly until Harper Martini got involved, and then things started to get really tense.
Now, tense, what do you mean by that?
Well, the three of them were constantly arguing about the wedding planning and the details.
All right, now I want to talk about the relationship between Genesis and Harper. What was that like in January of 2019?
I can't imagine anybody not liking Jen, but the more time I spent with Harper preparing for the wedding, the more it seemed obvious that Harper really did not like Jen.
Objection, Your Honor, to speculation. May I be heard?
Yes.
Your Honor, this witness has not laid any foundation as to how she would possibly know this. She's delving into the mindset of Harper Martini and trying to talk about what Harper Martini feels or doesn't feel about Genesis Petrillo. This is speculation and should not be allowed.
May I respond, Your Honor? The witness said, and I quote, "It seemed that Harper did not like Genesis," and so she is not speculating into the mind of Harper Martini. She's merely saying what she observed.
Response, Your Honor.
No, I'm going to overrule it for now. Not necessarily because of your argument, Mr. Hewitt, but I do think this is an opinion. But I think that you've maybe laid enough foundation. Make sure to lay that foundation about how she could know this, and feel free to re-raise your objection if they don't lay that foundation.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. Oh, thank you, Your Honor. Now, how did it seem obvious to you that Harper didn't like Genesis?
Well, the three of them were always arguing about the wedding plans and the details, and I know that Harper changed a lot of their original plans, so that caused a lot of tension for them, especially when we got to the rehearsal dinner.
Now, what were they arguing about around the time of the rehearsal dinner?
Oh, I mean, just about everything. The lighting, the vows, you name it. It was as if my kindergarten students were trying to decide over which color the poster should be.
And at any point, did Genesis ever confront Harper about their disagreements?
Yes, and when they did, Harper grabbed Jen's arm hard and pulled him into the hallway.
Objection, Your Honor, to improper character evidence. May I be heard?
Yes.
Your Honor, the witness just stated that at a previous incident, not during the exact night of the wedding, when the events in question, specifically with the wine bottles, occurred, but a previous event that Harper Martini grabbed Genesis Petrio's arm. This is improper character evidence because they're trying to use this prior event where Harper Martini interacted with Genesis to show that that Harper would perform similar acts at another time.
May I respond, Your Honor? Your Honor, we're simply laying foundation as to the relationship between Genesis and Harper on the days that were leading up to the night in question.
How is that relevant?
Well, being that one of the elements of battery is intent to harm, if we show that on a previous instance there was some intent to harm, it would be relevant to the case.
That sounds like character evidence to me. I'm going to sustain that objection. If you're talking about stuff in the past, in general, I'm going to sustain that as character evidence. If you can specifically tie it to the actual act, it might be a different outcome.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Rodriguez, so at the time leading up to the night of the rehearsal dinner, was there any instance that Harper and Genesis interacted with each other?
Yes, actually on the day of the rehearsal, Harper said some hurtful words to Jen that I know really upset Jen.
And what were those words?
The words specifically were, Jen should just leave the family and save the family the headache. Otherwise, I will make you disappear.
Okay. Now, I want to talk about the night of the rehearsal dinner itself. Could you tell us about Harper Martini's toast?
Yeah,
Objection
absolutely.
leading. May I be heard?
Overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Would you like for me to repeat the question, Ms. Rodriguez?
Yes, please.
Now, I want to talk about the night of the rehearsal dinner. Could you tell us about Harper Martini's toast?
Yeah, Harper just kept making a point of mocking Jen throughout the toast. They even referred to Genesis as a problem child.
And was Genesis drinking at this point?
They were, but not a lot.
Could you tell us what happened at around 10 p.m. on the night of the rehearsal dinner?
Oh, a complete mood change is what happened. Harper came out and presented Genesis with a bottle of wine.
And what wine did she present to Genesis?
It was called Cara wine.
Did the rest of the wedding party receive any gifts of wine from Harper?
Yes, but we were gifted with a different type of wine called Horizon. Genesis was the only one to actually receive the bottle of Cara.
And did you ever see Genesis drink from that Cara bottle of wine?
Yes, and then they offered it to everyone else at the wedding table. I was the only one who accepted it, but I took a sip of it and didn't swallow it. It tasted awful, so I spit it out.
And after that first time, was there any other time that Genesis drank from that Cara again?
Yes, over the next 45 minutes, Genesis drank several more glasses from the bottle that Harper had given them.
Now, could you tell us what happened a little bit later at around 11 p.m. and the rehearsal dinner?
Yeah, so we'd all been socializing for quite a bit, and Jen got up to dance, and it became obvious something was really wrong. I mean, Jen was stumbling around. She couldn't even talk right. I was pretty worried to see her like this. So a little bit later, I ended up taking her up to the bedroom.
And how was she when she got up to the bedroom?
So much worse.
Objection, Your Honor. May I be heard? Specifically to improper opinion, the opposing counsel just asked the witness for, they asked about Genesis's well-being. As the witness testified, she's a kindergarten teacher. She would have no knowledge or medical foundation as to the exact well-being of Genesis Petrio at the time. This calls for an improper opinion.
So as for what's on the record that the witness said, what did the witness say that you think is an improper opinion? Or is this preemptive?
Your Honor, I believe I said this calls for an improper opinion. The witness has testified to specific things they saw, but then opposing counsel went on to ask the witness about Genesis well-being in a way that would be more suited for an expert or doctor. Therefore, this calls for an improper opinion.
So there's nothing that the witness said yet on the record that you're objecting to?
No, Your Honor, just to opposing counsel's question.
Okay, I'm not gonna sustain it as to the question. I'm gonna overrule it for now. If the witness says something that you believe is an improper opinion, feel free to please raise your objection. You
Yes,
can
Your
repeat
Honor.
the question.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor. Now, how was Genesis when she got up to the room?
Um, Jen was sweating and vomiting at this point. It was worse than the flu season at my school. Jen's skin eventually, it was flush. And then right before they passed out, she said to me, 911.
And what did you do about that?
I knew I had to do something. So a little after midnight, I called emergency services and requested medical assistance for Genesis.
And what happened once they arrived?
The EMTs came in and they performed CPR on Jen while she was unconscious on the bathroom floor, and I rode with Jen in the ambulance to the hospital.
Okay. Now, after you were at the hospital with Genesis, when did you leave?
I stayed there all night, and I left around 8 a.m. when the doctors that came in and said that Jen had fallen into a coma, likely due to some type of poisoning. And so I knew I had to tell Casey, so I rushed back to Peony Estates.
And what happened once you got back to Peony Estates?
I ran into Harper in the hallway, and before I even said anything, Harper said to me, "Genesis got poisoned." I mean, I have absolutely no idea how Harper could have known at this point, since I was never
Objection to
able to get.
speculation, Your Honor. May I be heard? Your Honor, the witness just said, I don't know how she could have known. She's assuming that Harper does have this knowledge simply based off of things that she's heard. She's delving into the mindset of Harper Martini and assuming what Harper Martini does and doesn't know.
Okay, so I thought I heard Harper said something like she was poisoned. Is that the case?
Yes, she said that. Yeah, that's what she said.
For future reference, unless I address you directly, I would prefer that you wait until it's your turn to respond. Okay, so in that case, Ms. Tsai, how is the statement "I don't know" speculation?
Your Honor, if I may, the witness said, I don't know how she knew. The witness is assuming that Harper Martini does know this. And although the witness heard Harper say something along the lines of, oh no, Genesis got poisoned, that does not mean that Harper Martini did in fact know. They were having a conversation and Harper was speaking with this witness. After the witness finished quoting Harper Martini, then the witness went on to say, I don't know how she knew.
Your Honor, may I respond? The witness said, I don't know how she could have known, not how she knew. So that's not speculation.
I agree. Objection overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Now, after that encounter with Harper, did you ever find Casey?
I did, and as soon as I did, we both went back to the hospital immediately.
And what happened once the two of you got back to the hospital?
The doctors came in and they told Casey that Jen had died. That was the most heartbreaking moment of my life.
Very sorry, Ms. Rodriguez. Your Honor, I pass the witness.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. May I begin?
You may.
Ms. Rodriguez, you were at the rehearsal dinner, right?
That's correct.
And you were with Ms. Petrillo,
Yes, I mean, I was her maid of honor, so I was by her side.
but you didn't keep track of what she ate, right?
Not necessarily what she ate.
And you didn't keep track of what she drank.
I was with her most of the night, so I saw some of what she drank, but I can't account for every single thing she drank.
So just to be clear, that's a no?
Yes,
And you don't know everything that she consumed.
that's correct.
Now, earlier you mentioned interacting with Miss Martini. Oh, I'm sorry, I blanked for a minute. Earlier you mentioned interacting with Miss Martini, right?
Yes,
You also mentioned interacting with Genesis.
yes,
And you were a part of some of the conversations, right?
For the most part, I was there. I mean, I was part of the wedding party, so I was always, in and out.
But just to be clear, you weren't a part of every interaction, right?
No, not every single interaction.
Now I want to take you to that night of the wedding, the wedding rehearsal. You saw Casey arguing with Genesis, right?
Yes,
You saw Genesis consuming alcohol,
yes,
and Genesis consumed wine,
yes, she did.
champagne,
Yes, I saw her drink some champagne.
and she also ordered tequila shots, right?
Yes, but I'm pretty sure she didn't actually.
Ms. Rodriguez, just to be clear, she ordered tequila shots.
Yes, she did.
And that's not the first time she's consumed alcohol, is it?
Ever?
Ever.
Oh, no.
In fact, she's a heavy drinker, right?
Yeah, I mean, we like to, after 5 o'clock, we like to go out and have some
Character
drinks.
evidence.
What was that?
Improper character evidence. May I be heard?
You may.
The opposing party is trying to establish that just because Genesis was a heavy drinker, that she drank heavy on this incident, which is trying to establish conformity therewith, which is improper character evidence.
Response, Your Honor.
Yes.
If I may, this event that I'm specifically referring to, where Genesis was a heavy drinker, was actually the night of May 11th. Opposing counsel has already discussed this voicemail. This voicemail was left on that night. I'm simply trying to establish exactly what happened that night. I'm not trying to use this for conformity therewith, just that specific incident.
May I respond to?
Yeah, I'm gonna ask again. Could you tie it to the elements? Tie it to what we're here to decide?
Yes, Your Honor. If I may, direct the court's attention to case law, specifically the ones regarding the elements of today. I'm using this to refute specifically element 1, act by the defendant, and 2, intent. Opposing counsel earlier with the prior witness has tried to establish that this voicemail was part of the intent and why Harper Martini would want to harm Genesis. I'm about to ask this witness about the events of that night and about that voicemail which they were trying to use to prove intent.
May I respond, Your Honor? In that case, I would like to amend my objection as to character evidence and object to lack of foundation, as the defense has laid no foundation as to the context of the night that she's referring to.
Response, Your Honor?
Yes.
I was only about 2 questions in. I'm attempting to lay that foundation, and I'm including the context that opposing counsel was just referring to. I'm trying to provide the jury a bigger picture of exactly what was going on, including the well-being and health status of Genesis Petrillo.
Okay, well, I'm going to overrule the lack of foundation objection.
Your Honor, may I also assume that the objection to character evidence has been overruled?
Did you withdraw your objection to character evidence, counsel?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Yeah, you can re-raise that later if you want, but there's no ruling on that. That was amended, and I'm overruling lack of foundation.
Yes, Your Honor. So, Ms. Rodriguez, Genesis Petrillo was a heavy drinker?
Yes.
She was a heavy drinker the night of May 11th, 2019.
I mean, we were all celebrating, so we were all out drinking.
So that's a yes to my question?
To her being a heavy drinker?
Yes.
Yes.
In fact, Genesis actually got sick after that, didn't they?
Yes, I found Genesis vomiting later on.
And they also left a voicemail at the time?
Yes, but I didn't actually hear what the voicemail was about.
That's okay. That voicemail was to Harper Martini.
Yes.
Now I want to take you to the night of the actual wedding rehearsal. You know a Drew Matsuoka?
Yes, I do. He's actually the friend.
Sorry, go ahead.
He's actually the friend that introduced me to Casey. So.
And they're an employee of P&E Estates, right?
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance.
Is that a character evidence objection?
Relevance.
Relevance. Okay, yeah. Explain the relevance.
Objection. Yes, Your Honor.
Sorry.
Yes, Your Honor.
I'm sorry. Plaintiff, can you explain your objection?
Yes, Drew, I can't remember the last name, has nothing to do with today's case, being that the fact that this is between Harper Martini and Genesis Petrillo.
Response, Your Honor?
Yes.
Specifically to those elements that we were required to refer to. Again, this is going to an act by the defendant, the first element of civil battery. Drew Matsuoka, if I may, is an employee of Peony Estates. Peony Estates regularly uses pesticides to maintain the property and keep out pests. The question in today's case is whether or not Genesis Petrillo was poisoned by Harper Martini using pesticides. Drew Matsuoka can establish, and this witness did hear Drew Matsuoka say this, that Peony Estates does not hire a professional and regularly uses pesticides. And if I also may, the expert witnesses will go into how Genesis Petrillo may have come in contact. I'm using this to refute that this was an act by the defendant, the first element.
Objections overruled.
Yes, Your Honor. So, Ms. Rodriguez, Drew Matsuoka is an employee of Peony Estates.
Yes.
You're aware there was an insect infestation.
Yes, he had mentioned something about it to me.
And you're aware that pesticides are used at the estate.
Yes.
In fact, Miss Martini, sorry, can you still hear me?
Yes, I can.
In fact, you heard Miss Martini say every room needs to be sprayed
Objection, Your
down.
Honor, hearsay?
Is that a hearsay objection?
Yes, Your Honor.
Blaine?
Sorry, I might cut out for a minute. What happened?
I'd like to hear, it was a hearsay objection and
Yes, Your
As
Honor.
as to the statement of Harper Martini.
Yes, Your Honor. If I could direct the court's attention to an exception, Rule 8033. This is Harper Martini's then existing mental, emotional, or physical condition. This is a statement of the state of mind. They had an intent and plan to spray down the entire estate with pesticides.
what's the exact statement that's being objected to?
Yes, Your Honor. The exact statement is every room needs to be sprayed down.
Do you agree with that, Mr. Hewitt?
Yes, Your Honor.
Can you respond to her exception?
Yes, I'd like to amend my objection of hearsay and raise the objection of lack of foundation, as the defense is like no foundation to the conditions in which Harper was saying everything needs to be, to that statement, everything needs to be sprayed.
Response,
Okay.
Your Honor?
No, I'm going to overrule, lay the foundation, but I don't think that anything that's on the record right now needed any further foundation. So objections overruled.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Rodriguez, you heard Miss Rodriguez, Miss Martini said every room needs to be sprayed down. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've heard her say a few things regarding the protocols.
In fact, to your knowledge, Peony Estates did not hire a professional. Is that correct?
That's to my knowledge, but I'm not involved in any sort of way with the administration side of Peony Estates, so I can't,
It's okay.
I can't actually say.
It's okay, Ms. Rodriguez, but that's a yes to my question.
Yes.
Now I want to take you to the specific speech that you were talking to earlier during that dinner. You saw Miss Martini give Miss Petrillo a wine bottle.
Yes, that's correct.
And just yes or no, you came in contact with the wine.
Yes, but I mean, like I said in my direct, it
But
tasted awful.
Just yes or no.
Yeah, yes.
You weren't flushed.
No,
You didn't vomit.
no. But
You
I
didn't
never
feel
swallowed it
But-
because I spit it out.
But Miss Rodriguez, you didn't feel sick, did you?
No, but again, I never actually swallowed the wine. I spit it out.
It was still in your mouth?
Yes, but again, I didn't swallow it.
Now, just to be clear, you didn't see Miss Martini put pesticides in the wine.
No, I did not see that.
You didn't see Miss Martini holding the Cara wine bottle, did you?
Miss Martini? I mean, she came out with it, so I did see her holding the car wine.
But you didn't see Miss Martini use pesticides, did you?
She came out with it later, so no.
But Miss Rodriguez, my question was whether or not Miss Martini was holding pesticides.
At that very moment, no. But like I said in my direct, they were carrying pesticides
Miss
about an hour
Rodriguez.
before dinner.
Just yes or no.
Can you restate the question?
You didn't see Miss Martini using pesticides.
No, not at the rehearsal dinner.
You consumed other alcohol.
I did, yes.
Wine,
Yes,
cocktails,
yes,
tequila.
yes. I mean, we were celebrating my best friend, so
In fact, you didn't count how many drinks you had.
no, I wasn't keeping track.
And just yes or no, you lost count, didn't you?
Sorry, could you say that again?
Yes or no, you lost count of how many drinks you had.
I mean, like I said, we were so focused on just celebrating the happy couple. I wasn't really paying attention to how many drinks I was having.
So that's a yes to my question?
Yes.
No further questions at this time.
Your Honor, if I may, could I proceed with a brief redirect?
Yes.
Now, Miss Rodriguez, you said I'm sorry, Miss Rodriguez, Genesis was vomiting on the night that you celebrated before the rehearsal dinner, correct?
Yes, back in May.
Objection, Your Honor, to leading. May I be heard?
Sustained.
Sorry, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
Miss Rodriguez, how was Genesis after she drank on the night that you all celebrated?
Genesis, yeah, back in May, Jen had thrown up and she was vomiting, but I mean, it was not as bad as it was on the night of the rehearsal dinner.
Your Honor, no further questions.
Okay. Any recross?
No recross, Your Honor.
Your Honor, I ask that the witness be allowed to step down.
Yes, you can step down. I'm
Your
just
Honor,
going,
this-
sorry, I'm just going to take a brief 30 seconds to fill up my ballot, and then you can proceed.
Absolutely.
Okay, proceed.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff calls Dr. Jimin Kwan to the stand. Good evening. Could you please introduce yourself to the court?
Of course. I'm Dr. Jimin Kwan.
Hi, Dr. Kwan. Could you tell us a little bit about what you do for a living?
I'm the chief resident physician at River Valley Hospital here in Midlands.
What exactly does a job like that entail?
Well, my team and I are tasked with quickly and accurately diagnosing conditions in the ER to provide Midland citizens with the best quality care possible.
What kind of education qualifies you for that position?
I earned my BS in biology from the Georgia Institute of Technology. From there, I attended NC Chapel Hill, where I earned my MD. I've also completed my residency at Emory, and I've since completed 2 fellowships regarding medical toxicology.
What exactly is medical toxicology?
Medical toxicology is the science of detecting, diagnosing, and treating different kinds of poisons and toxins.
And in today's case specifically, would you say that you relied upon reasonable facts and data?
Yes.
And are the methods that you used relied upon by other experts in your field?
Yes, sir.
Would you say that you reliably applied those methods to those facts and data?
I did.
And would you say that your conclusion is the result of these reliable methods reliably applied?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you, Dr. Kwan. Let's talk a little bit about your involvement in today's case. So when did you first come into contact with Genesis Petrillo?
I was assigned to Genesis Petrillo's case when they entered the ER, so around 2 a.m. that morning.
Could you describe their condition at that point?
Of course. The patient was reportedly vomiting.
Objection, improper opinion. May it be heard?
Yes.
While this witness has talked about her educational background and so forth, pursuant to Rule 702, there must be 4 prongs that must be met in order to establish this witness as an expert. However, opposing counsel has not yet laid 702C, which is the testimony is a product of reliable principles and methods, and 702D, which the expert has reliably applied the principles and the methods to the facts of today's case.
So I remember hearing, and I'm sure Mr. Turner can speak to this, some of that, asking about methods and such. Did they not go into enough detail, or was I mishearing that?
Yes, Your Honor. So if I may direct the court's attention to case law, in particular Davis v. Adams, which is on Page 3, Davis v. Adams states that, the last line states that the proponent of the evidence has the burden of proving each section of Rule 702 by a preponderance of the evidence. Now, in regards to Rules 702C and D, the witness simply answered a yes. Opposing counsel's question was, is this method reliable? The answer to that was yes. Did you reliably apply this method? The answer to that was also just a yes. This does not meet that preponderance of the evidence burden that they must meet.
Response?
Your Honor, it was my desire not to waste the court's time. If the defense would like me to go into my experts with specific scientific methods, I would be happy to do so.
Yes. Going into methods is not wasting the court's time. I'll sustain the objection and give some more background into those prongs before you go into expert opinions. So objections.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
So Dr. Kwan, we talked a little bit about this earlier, but would you be willing to talk through exactly what the method you used in today's case was?
I'd be glad to. You see, in emergency medicine, time is of the essence. So our acronym is ACT. A stands for assess, C stands for care, and T is for treat. And that's the process that we go through with each and every single one of our patients. In this case, I assessed Genesis's conditions. I saw that she was vomiting. I took care of her by making sure that she was hooked up to our IV bag and had all of her vitals stabilized. And then I treated her with the antidote later on in the day.
All right. Moving on then, Dr. Kwan, could you talk us through a little bit about what Genesis's initial condition was?
Of course.
Objection. Your Honor, I would like to re-raise my prior objection about improper opinion. My objection was that opposing counsel has not fully established both 702C and D. Now, this is not about the method, but the reliability of the method. As if I may direct the court's attention to case law, Terror Readers Association of Midlands v. Merrill Dow, which is also on page 3, states that in regards to the reliability of the method, they must state something on whether it be an error rate or acceptance in the field. And furthermore, in regards to 702D, the reliability, whether that actually has been established in today's case, has also not been established.
Response, Your Honor. Specifically, this to the objection to the lack of testimony as to whether this technique is relied upon by other experts in the field. Dr. Kwan has already testified in a court that this is an expert which is relied upon by other experts in the field. She has already testified that this is a widely used and reliable emergency room practice.
Do you have any response to the case law?
To the case law specifically,
Sure.
If you would give me just 1 second, Your Honor. I'm just going to pull it up.
Actually, it's all right. I'm going to overrule the objection. The case law, my understanding, the court's understanding is that that list of things it lists are not dispositive. You don't have to show one of those things. That's just an example. And so I do think they've met that preponderance standard by her explanation and by saying other experts rely on it. So I'm gonna overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. May I continue?
Yes.
Circling back, Dr. Kwan, could you please describe Genesis Petrio's condition when they initially entered the clinic?
Of course. Like I was saying, the patient was initially vomiting. They were also experiencing muscle twitches and bronchospasms.
Your Honor, at this time, I would just ask to begin erecting a demonstrative.
Yes. Is this shown to the jury?
Yes, Your Honor.
Any objection to this demonstrative being shown to the jury at this point?
Not just yet, Your Honor.
All right. Then go ahead.
I'm terribly sorry for interrupting you, Dr. Kwan. Please continue.
Oh, like I was saying, Genesis was also suffering from bronchospasms and some muscle twitches.
And what was your initial suspicion?
Well, my initial expectation was that Genesis was suffering from alcohol poisoning, largely because their vomit smelled acidic and alcoholic, and we also found that their blood alcohol content was relatively high later on in the night.
To your knowledge, had they been consuming alcohol that night?
Yes, they had. Their BAC, or their blood alcohol content, was 0.16%, which is not high enough to have been demonstrating these symptoms.
So what did you go about doing then?
I conducted a full examination that included the patient's vitals, checking all of the patient's systems, and my new conclusion was that Genesis had suffered from organophosphate poisoning.
Can you talk us through why exactly you pursued that conclusion?
Of course, there were three main reasons. First, the patient's the patient's pupils were contracting. The patient was
Objection,
suffering.
improper opinion. May I be heard?
Yes.
While this witness has been established that, while Dr. Kwan has established that he is an expert in the field of general medical practices, working as a doctor, there has not yet been enough foundation that allows Dr. Kwan to specifically testify about organophosphate poisoning in particular.
Brief response.
Your Honor, I would just respond by saying that we have satisfied all four prongs. This doctor in question, Dr. Kwan, has specific education concerning toxicology, which is exactly an activity that she is engaging in right now. She has described how she used the reliable methods that she has been taught in emergency room practice, and she is using her expert capacity through her education and her previously taught reliable methods that are relied upon by other experts in the field.
Yeah.
Your Honor, may I respond to?
No, I'm going to overrule the objection, and feel free to take anything you have with her specific experience with organophosphate up on cross, Mr. Pat.
Yes, Your Honor.
Like I was saying, the pupils were contracted. Genesis was suffering from incontinence as well as having an extremely slow pulse, all of which are antithetical to an alcohol poisoning diagnosis.
So did you do anything to confirm this diagnosis?
I ordered a poison and toxins analysis test, which confirmed that Genesis had organophosphates in their system.
Would you recognize the results of those tests if they were shown to you today in court?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, at this time, I would like to show Exhibit 5, which has been previously admitted. What exactly are we looking at here, Dr. Kwan? Let's just, while they're pulling that up.
So Exhibit 5 is a copy of Genesis's poisons and toxins analysis test.
And what exactly do the results mean?
Well, the results show that Genesis had a low acetylcholinesterase level, better known as ACHE, which is a conclusive sign that someone has consumed organophosphates.
Why exactly is that?
Well, low levels of ACHE organophosphates inhibit ACHE from reproducing. So when you have a low level, it lets doctors know that someone has conclusively ingested pesticides.
And did you test in any way the ingestion of that pesticide?
I did. We tested Genesis's stomach contents from her vomit, and we found that the wine in her stomach had pesticides laced in it.
Thank you, Dr. Kwan. Circling back to the night in question, can you describe what happened after you pursued this diagnosis?
Later on in the night, Genesis stopped vomiting, but they were having trouble breathing. You know, if I was correct in my diagnosis, they were extremely close to death. So I administered an antidote, but unfortunately, Genesis passed away.
Your Honor, or Dr. Kwan, in your expert opinion, can you talk us through exactly the events that led to Genesis's death?
You can finish just this answer, but keep it.
Yes, Your Honor. At some point before Genesis had entered the ER, they consumed copious amounts of wine that was laced with pesticide. As a result, their nervous system failed, which ultimately caused their death.
Thank you, Dr. Kwan. I pass the witness.
Cross-examination, Your Honor.
Yes, please proceed.
Dr. Kwan, you treated Genesis, right?
Yes, I was the doctor assigned to Genesis's case.
But you didn't know if she had any checkups?
Any checkups? No, sir.
For 3 years?
No, sir. I was just the emergency room attending.
Yes, objection, Your Honor, as to relevance.
Yeah, what's your response, Mr. Pack?
Your Honor, this is in regard to the treatment, the routine that Dr. Kwan followed when treating Genesis in the hospital. This goes to our credibility in establishing certain steps that a doctor must perform when they have a patient that's admitted into the hospital.
Response, Your Honor.
As this goes to the credibility, it's gonna be overruled.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor.
So, doctor, you didn't know if Genesis had any allergies?
Not that I know of, but the person who came in with Genesis didn't let me know about any allergies.
And you didn't know if Genesis had any underlying medical conditions either?
That is correct.
Now, Dr. Kwan, you initially concluded alcohol poisoning, correct?
Yes, that was my initial expectation, although it was never an official diagnosis.
Doctor, so just for the record, is that a yes to my question?
Yes.
Yet, you administered an organophosphate pesticide antidote.
That is correct.
Yes or no?
Once Genesis's symptoms evolved, I knew it was organophosphate poisoning.
Doctor, my questions will consist of a yes or no answer. And for the record, is that a yes?
Objection, Your Honor. Objection as to misleading the jury, Your Honor. May I be heard?
Yes.
Cutting my witness's answers specifically to yes or no for the whole of her especially when the defense attorney has already asked questions in such a way that might mislead the jury, I think is definitely going to go to problematically misleading the jury. This expert has to be allowed to explain their answers on cross.
Your Honor, may I respond to that?
So, yes, and make clear, are you, in the way you're asking your questions, saying that your questions should just be answered by a yes or no? Is that the point you're defending right now?
Yes. The question I asked simply elicits a yes or no answer in what the doctor observed and what she specifically wrote in her report.
And
Response, Your Honor? Oh, terribly sorry.
You're okay. And you're saying all of your questions should be answered with a yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, response?
Yes, Your Honor. Even just with the last two questions this attorney has asked, he asked specifically, first, your initial suspicion, or his words, your initial conclusion was alcohol poisoning, and then specifically moved several hours forward in the future and asked, then you administered an antidote to something else entirely, skipping the context in the middle. The doctor here, the witness on the stand, is specifically trying to add that context, which the defense attorney has removed. Therefore, this is, especially with the yes or no, this is inherently misleading the jury.
Your Honor, may I respond to that?
No, I'm ready to make a ruling. I'm gonna sustain the objection, and especially with regards to this expert, the expert's here to share her expertise. I'm going to give her some latitude to give context to her answers that she thinks is necessary. If you want to follow up with a more specific question after that to make one thing really clear, and you think that there's a point in which the witness is becoming non-responsive, you're free to object. But for the most part, I'm going to give witnesses, and especially expert witnesses, leeway to contextualize their answers. So the objection is sustained.
Yes, Your Honor. So, doctor, you administered a pesticide antidote, right?
Yes, once I had conclusively diagnosed that Genesis had suffered from organophosphate poisoning.
Yep. But the patient's condition worsened after.
Yes, unfortunately, the patient slipped into a seizure, or excuse me, the patient slipped into a coma after a seizure. I was too late with the antidote.
Matter of fact, the patient died after the antidote.
Yes.
Now, doctor, you are familiar with the affidavit of Angel Rodriguez, correct?
Yes, sir. I read it when I was preparing for my report.
And Angel came into contact with the wine, Cara wine.
As far as I know, she spit it out immediately after she put it in her mouth, so I wouldn't count that as contact.
Doctor, so is that a note to my question? Angel Rodriguez did not come in contact with the wine?
She came in contact, but not to the same extent that Genesis had.
So is that going to be a yes to my question or a no to my question?
I'm sorry, Mr. Pack. Medicine is so nuanced, I really can't answer with a yes or no.
Now, doctor, you wrote a report for today's trial, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you concluded that incontinence is not a symptom of alcohol poisoning.
That is
Objection
correct.
as to hearsay.
Your Honor, may I respond to that?
I understand the objection. As far as the question is just talking about this witness's conclusions, the expert's conclusions, I'm going to overrule the objection. Obviously, don't
Yes,
read
Your Honor.
from the report unless you're going to be impeaching or something like that. But I'm going to overrule it for now because these are the conclusions that this witness
Yes, Your Honor.
is presenting.
Now, doctor, as I was saying, you concluded incontinence was not a symptom of alcohol poisoning, right?
Yes, that is correct.
And you are familiar with the alcohol impairment chart by the
Yes.
Midland Center for Public Health?
Yes, sir. I provided it for this case as Exhibit 23.
Your Honor, permission to tender to opposing counsel and the witness in turn what's been marked as Exhibit 23?
Yes.
Doctor, this is the alcohol impairment chart, right?
Yes, sir.
And it's a fair and accurate copy, right?
Yes, sir.
And it hasn't been changed or altered in any way, has it?
No, sir.
At this time, the defense offers to move Exhibit 23 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
It's admitted.
Now, doctor, if you look at the second to last column that says severe impairments, the second to last bullet point says incontinence of urine and feces, correct?
Yes, sir. That's what it says.
Yet you concluded incontinence was not a symptom of alcohol poisoning.
That is correct, because a BAC of 0.26 to 0.35 does not necessarily constitute poisoning.
Doctor, so was that a yes to my question?
Yes, incontinence is not a symptom of alcohol poisoning.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Your Honor, obviously we have no redirect. I just asked that my witness be allowed to step down.
Yes, Dr. Kwan, you're free to step down. Thank you for your time.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff rests their case in chief. And as we are playing dangerously with all loss, I would ask either for a 5-minute recess or no recess whatsoever, whatever the defense is comfortable with.
What is the defense comfortable with?
A brief 5-minute recess is fine. If
you'd rather do 5 than none.
Your Honor.
How about 2.5?
Okay, let's do 2.5, and I'm going to be much more succinct in my rulings. Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Is the defense ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. And as I said before we went to break, if we are running up against all loss, I'm going to limit my rulings to one response from each advocate, and I would ask the advocates to show judgment in which objections you make and which ones you prefer.
Your Honor, if I may, I actually just reached out to the tournament organizers, excuse me. Our all loss time is 10 o'clock. I just want to make sure everyone is aware of that.
10 o'clock. Okay, great. We'll keep that in mind.
Your Honor, may I proceed?
Yes.
Please state your name for the court.
Hi, how are you? My name's Dr. Enfield Cannon.
Can you tell us a little bit about your background, doctor?
Oh, well, I'm a doctor in toxicology. You know, it all started back when me and my brother, we were little. And I got some food poisoning from some really bad cheese curds. So I realized I didn't want anyone else to ever get poisoned like that. So I got my undergrad from Ohio State, went to Harvard, got my MD, summa cum laude, by the way. And then I was a doctor for a while, but you know, I thought it was boring, so I wanted to go into the fast lane. So I went into consulting.
What kind of experience do you have as a consultant?
Oh, let's see. I've done about 35 cases, typically for civil or criminal defendants.
Doctor, did you review over any facts or data for today's case?
Oh, you betcha I did. I examined Miss Petrio's toxicology report, her toxins analysis, death certificate, along with a test of a wine bottle and an alcohol impairment chart. And in terms of statements, I analyzed Dr. Kwan's report, as well as Ms. Rodriguez's affidavit.
Was there any sort of method that you used when going over this data?
Oh, absolutely. We use the math method. The M stands for your materials. Then after that, you take those materials and you analyze them. That's your A. Then you make theories off of your analysis. That's your T. And your H is your hypotheses.
Would you say that this math method is reliable in your line of work?
Oh, you betcha. It's what I was taught at Harvard. Let's see, it has a known error rate. It's been publicized all over the place. Gold standard in our field. I mean, if you don't have the body, it's the best way to go.
And did you reliably apply this math method for today's case?
Absolutely. You betcha I did.
Doctor, how did you get involved?
Well, I was hired by the defense counsel to examine Dr. Kwan's findings and see what my own would be in today's case.
And what were your findings?
I found that Dr. Kwan found one possibility.
Objection, Your Honor. I'll keep it very brief, but I also have an objection as to improper expert testimony. May I be heard?
Yes.
If I may proffer, specifically the question in today's case, the act from the charge is an organophosphate poisoning. This doctor has no specific experience with organophosphate poisonings. They have no published research, have done no research, and have not provided that. And 702A says that they must have specific knowledge as to a fact or the fact in question in today's case.
Your Honor, may I respond to that? The doctor has stated that he got his MD from Harvard with a specialization in toxicology, and he did go on to state that he did write multiple published articles. He included a CV for today's case, which can confirm this.
Brief response, Your Honor.
Yes.
If I may proffer from the doctor's own report, they said they included no reports whatsoever about organophosphate poisoning in their CV because they'd never done any.
I'm going to overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
So, Doctor, what were your findings for today's case?
My findings is that Dr. Kwan found one possibility, but there are three other possibilities that I don't believe were properly examined in today's case. Genesis could have died from alcohol poisoning. She could have died from an untreated ailment. She also could have died from a potential other contaminant that wasn't that wine, an outside one, if you will. I made a little demonstrative if I could kind of show you what's going on here.
Of course. Now, before you begin, Doctor, do you rely on this demonstrative in coming to your conclusions today?
Absolutely, don't you know?
And in your opinion, will it aid the jury in better understanding your testimony?
Oh, you betcha it will.
Your Honor, permission for the witness to screen share his demonstrative?
Yes. Any objection?
No objections, Your Honor, at this time.
Now, Doctor, let's start with your first finding. What was it?
My first finding is that, I'm sorry, let me get this thing over, yeah, technology these days. My first finding is that it's very possible that Genesis could have died of alcohol poisoning.
And how would that have been possible?
Well, Genesis's blood alcohol content, her BAC, when it was tested, was a 0.16. However, it's very possible, especially when you compare her symptoms to an alcohol impairment chart, that earlier that night she may have had a much higher, perhaps even fatal level of BAC.
And would you recognize that alcohol impairment chart if I showed you today in court?
Yes, sir, I would.
Under permission to tender to opposing counsel and the witness in turn what's already been entered into evidence as Exhibit 23.
Yes.
Doctor, what is this?
That's the alcohol impairment chart.
And it's a fair and accurate copy?
Yes, sir, it is.
And hasn't been changed or altered in any way, has it?
No, sir, it hasn't.
So what can you tell us about this chart?
Okay, now hold on here. I can tell you that we use this to show other consultants in the business. A good way to remember it is this little acronym I teach, that baby ivory elephants have sweet lives. But if you're down here in this L, that elephant's probably going to have a shorter life because that's life-threatening impairment.
Doctor, can you point out some of the symptoms that Genesis experienced and where they align on this chart?
Oh, of course. Well, based off of what I found, she exhibited an inability to stand or walk. She showed vomiting, incontinence of urine or feces. Ultimately, she went into a coma, and she died from respiratory paralysis, also known as respiratory arrest.
Thank you, doctor. Let the record reflect that the witness has marked a blue line next to inability to stand or walk, vomiting, incontinence of urine and feces, coma, and serious danger of death from respiratory paralysis. Permission to preserve these markings for closing?
Yes.
Doctor, let's go into your second finding. What was that?
My second finding is that it's very possible that Genesis Petrillo could have died from an undiagnosed ailment.
And why is that important in today's case?
Well, Genesis hadn't had any kind of formal checkup for about 3 years prior to her death. So it's very possible that during those 3 years, she could have developed an allergy to something she was given that night, or she could have developed a liver disease.
Can you elaborate on that liver disease a little more?
Yes, well, a telltale sign of that liver disease is a low amount of a compound called acetylcholinesterase. If she had this liver disease that night, it would have made handling alcohol much harder on her body, and that could have caused her death.
Doctor, let's move on to your final finding. Can you tell us what that was?
Yes, my final conclusion is that Genesis could have died from something else that had pesticides in it. And I came to that conclusion based off the way the stomach works.
Well, how does the stomach work?
Well, let's suppose you have a pesticide contaminated tomato, and you put it in the stomach along with a perfectly normal wine. The stomach's going to mix and churn all that stuff around there, and if you were to cut that stomach open, the wine could potentially look contaminated. But in reality, we wouldn't actually know what that contaminant was.
Dr. Cannon, what were your overall conclusions for today's case?
My overall conclusions is that had we had more time and testing be done, we would actually know and be able to rule out any of these other possibilities, but that simply didn't happen today. So I can't really conclusively say exactly what happened in today's case.
No further questions.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Dr. Cannon. I have just a few questions for you on behalf of the plaintiff, and I'd like to start with what you do for a living. So you
right.
actually work as a consultant for Gardner Consulting.
That's correct, I do.
You've testified in 35 cases before today.
Yes, sir, I have.
Every single one of them has been on behalf of the defense?
Criminal or civil defendants, yes, sir.
But always defense.
That's correct.
And actually, one of your firm's largest customers is a company that produces these organophosphate pesticides.
Objection, relevance?
Response, Your Honor?
Yes.
This is going towards the doctor's bias, and bias is always relevant.
Your Honor, may I respond to that?
Briefly.
The doctor's employer's clients, whoever that is, does not make the facts of this case more or less probable.
I'm going to overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor. Would you like me to repeat the question, Dr. Cannon?
Yes, please.
So one of your firm's largest clients is actually a producer of these organophosphate pesticides?
Detsky, yes, sir.
And it's your belief that it is in your financial interest, and I apologize, your firm's financial interest for something other than pesticide to have caused Genesis's death?
Objection, compound.
Overruled.
Yes, Your Honor. Would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
It is your understanding or your opinion that your firm has a significant financial interest in the cause of Genesis Petrio's death being something other than this pesticide?
My firm's, are you, I'm kind of confused.
I can clarify for you.
Yes,
I'm
please.
terribly sorry,
Yes.
Dr. Cannon. What I am asking is, it is your understanding that your firm has a significant financial interest in the outcome of this case being something other than an organophosphate pesticide poisoning?
It's passable. If you're referring to what Detsky told me, that was after I wrote my report.
Thank you, Dr. Kwan, but I apologize, Dr. Cannon, is that a yes or a no to my question?
Sure.
Thank you. And you were paid $50,000 to prepare this report?
For my consulting, yes. You know, these bow ties can't pay for themselves.
Exactly. Well, let's talk about what $50,000 paid for. So on direct, you provided 4 alternative theories, correct?
Sure. You know, I kind of put some people put those two
I
into
think
one,
that
but
was a
yes.
yes or no question. I apologize, Dr. Cannon. I'll go through them with you if you'd like. So that's going to be alcohol poisoning,
That's correct.
possible liver disease,
Yes.
an allergic reaction,
Yes.
and poisoning from some other source.
That's correct. Yes.
And you weren't able to find any conclusive evidence for any of these?
I mean, there was some evidence here and there, but sure. It's not as likely, but it's still passable.
In fact, you found that all of these were less likely than Dr. Kwan's finding.
That's correct, but they're still passable.
And actually, it was your finding in your report that the facts in today's case line up with an organophosphate pesticide poisoning?
That's correct.
All right, thank you, Dr. Cannon. Let's talk through those 4 alternatives. So first, you said alcohol poisoning.
That's correct.
And this was, you actually have some experience working with alcohol poisoning, right?
I do, yes, that's correct.
And the lowest BAC you've ever seen in a fatal poisoning was 0.30%?
That's correct, yes.
And Genesis Petrio's tested BAC was 0.16%?
Yes, sir, it was.
And on direct, you said that some of her symptoms might have suggested otherwise?
Earlier that night, yes.
However, you also found that no evidence whatsoever pointed to her blood alcohol content ever reaching that high.
It's possible, yes.
Yes, that is what you found, is it not?
It is, yes.
All right, thank you, Dr. Cannon. And also, this theory doesn't explain the organophosphate in Genesis Petrio's stomach?
That's correct, that one doesn't.
All right, well then let's move on. Let's talk about liver disease or hepatic disease, right?
Yes, liver disease.
You actually found that this was the least likely alternative?
Yes, I believe so.
And this is because fatal levels of liver disease are characterized by jaundice?
That's correct.
And that is the yellowing of the skin and eyes?
That's correct.
And to your knowledge from the reports you reviewed, did Genesis Petrio have yellow skin?
Dr. Kwan didn't put it down, so I assume not.
All right, well, let's move on then. Let's talk about a possible allergy. So you suggested that it's possible that Genesis Petrio developed an allergic reaction to something that she ate or drank that night?
That's correct.
And this is in spite of the fact that she exhibited none of the characteristic reactions of an allergic reaction?
That's correct.
No hives?
She didn't have hives, no.
No inflammation?
No inflammation.
All right. And in fact, you also found that this one was pretty unlikely?
It was unlikely, but still possible.
All right, well then let's talk about that 4th theory. You said that it's possible that Genesis Petrio might have been poisoned by something other than the wine.
That's correct, yes.
And are you aware of the fact that the bottle of wine that was given to Genesis tested positive for organophosphates?
Objection, compound.
Overruled.
Are you aware of the fact that the bottle of wine given to Genesis Petrillo tested positive for organophosphates?
Yes, but we don't know when it had when it got the pesticides in it.
But that's a yes to my question.
Objection, Your Honor, may it be heard?
Yes.
Per your prior ruling, I asked that my witness be given some laterality in answering these questions that opposing counsel was asking. We've established that Dr. Cannon is an expert, and these
Response, Your Honor?
responses.
No, I don't think it's necessary. My ruling is not to interrupt the witness, of course, and to allow them to contextualize to the extent that they want, but you're allowed to follow up and ask if that was a yes to the question, or to try to make it more precise if you want to. So I'm going to overrule the objection.
Yes, Your
Honor.
Make sure not to interrupt the witness, obviously, but the witness is free to contextualize as they like, and the attorney is free to follow up as they like.
And
Yes,
so,
Your Honor.
Dr. Cannon, you are also aware that all of the food and drinks left over from that night were tested for organophosphate?
Leftover food, yes.
And none of that tested positive for organophosphate?
None of the leftovers, that's correct.
And you are aware that only one person that night tested positive for an organophosphate poisoning?
That's correct.
And that was Genesis Petrillo?
Yes, sir, it was.
And only Genesis Petrillo had the Carl wine that night?
From what I've gathered, that's correct. I did hear about the friend came into contact with that wine, so I'm not fully sure.
But, from reviewing Angel Rodriguez's affidavit and your own investigation, only Genesis Petrillo drank that wine that night?
Of what I know, yes.
I pass the witness, Your Honor.
All right, any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor.
Dr. Cannon, thank you for your time.
Yes, sir.
At this time, the defense calls Austin Lewis to the stand.
Hello, Austin Lewis. And you can proceed.
Please introduce yourself to the court.
My name's Austin Jane Lewis.
And what's your current occupation?
Well, mate, I'm the current head winemaker here at Peony Estates.
And do you know why you're in court today?
Yeah, I work with Harper Martini. All the family calls her Harpy. They're saying that she's responsible for that horrible accident where Genesis passed away.
And before we talk about that accident, what was your relationship with the defendant?
Let's see. Well, I first met Harpy when we was working at a different winery a while back. We instantly clicked, and she was always just so supportive of me and treated me like family. We shortly started working at Peony Estates afterwards.
And what do you know of Harper's role at Peony Estates?
Well, she's the boss woman. She founded Peony Estates and runs the business side of things. But honestly, to anyone who's really close to Harpy knows that the business always comes after Casey.
And what, if anything, do you know about this accident?
Well, people are blaming that Harper had something to do with some poisoned wine. Apparently, it was a bottle of the 2019 Cara wine we make here at the Estates.
Would you recognize that bottle if we were to show you it today?
Yeah, I sure reckon I would.
Permission to tender and publish what has been pre-admitted prior to trial is Exhibit 2A and 2B.
Yes.
What am I showing you?
Yeah, that's the bottle of Cara wine we make here at the Estates. Ain't she a beauty?
Has it been changed or altered in any way?
No, it doesn't look like it, mate.
And what do you know about this bottle?
Well, I believe authorities had found the bottle and they tested it for some pesticides, and it did seem to have some pesticides in it.
And what do you know about where this bottle was found?
Yeah, so, we had sprayed some pesticides just a few days before the wedding and wedding rehearsal, just as a precaution. And we threw away all the pesticides and canisters into a specific dumpster. And, the wine bottle was actually also found in that dumpster. But, it's like throwing some shrimp on the barbie and being surprised that the shrimp's cooking.
You may take this exhibit down. And how do you normally use pesticides at Peony Estates?
More so for precautionary measures. We bought a Solove swamp, so from time to time we have some trouble with pests. Let me tell you though, I've seen enough pests down under and I just can't stand to look at anymore.
And what are your experience with chemical pesticides?
All my professional and personal experiences with the bug-off pesticide.
Relevant.
I
Is
believe
that-
that's an objection.
Is that a relevance objection?
Yes, Your Honor.
Response?
Seeing as the supposed use in poisoning today is pesticides, how pesticides were kept at Peony Estates is relevant. This just goes towards the first prong of the element of battery, which is an act by the defendant.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
Briefly. The defense specifically asked about Austin Lewis's interaction with pesticide, and they are not the defendant in this case, so their acts with pesticide are irrelevant.
I'm going to give some leeway for now for them to tie it up because I do think pesticides are relevant, and I assume they're going somewhere with this line of questioning. So I'm going to overrule for now.
Yes, Your Honor. So what are your experiences with chemical pesticides?
Yeah, so all my professional experience working at Peony Estates, my experiences with the bug-off pesticides. Let me tell you that bug-off stuff is super effective. It's a shame it makes us toss out so many grapes though.
What do you mean you have to toss out so many grapes?
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
Can you explain that objection?
They're talking about tossing out grapes, and the case is about Harper Martini poisoning a bottle of wine, and grapes have nothing to do with the bottle of wine that's in question in the case today.
Response, Your Honor?
Yeah.
We are actually trying to prove the first prong of the elements of battery. First off, that it was not an act by the defendant. We're doing this by providing an alternate case theory. And this is also going to show the making and production of the wine in question today. So this is going to have a point in today's trial.
May I respond, Your Honor?
No, I'm going to overrule the objection. Insofar as they're providing an alternative theory, that's perfectly relevant.
Yes, Your Honor. So, pardon, how do you use pesticides at Peony Estates?
Yeah, so let me just kind of show you what I mean. So we grow our grapes on a slope, right? So imagine my hand is the slope.
Objection, Your Honor, relevant. May I be heard?
Yes.
The witness is referring to the witness is referring to practices that adhere specifically to Rule 12-100, which is the Midlands Building Codes, and they are trying the opposing counsel is trying to establish that they broke some sort of building codes that would have led to the death of Genesis Petrillo. However, it has already been established that Peony Estates did not break any Midlands building codes, so it would not be relevant to the case.
Response, Your Honor?
A brief response.
We are not referring Midlands Business Code. There was no question of storage. This is all about intent, and this is all about an act by the defendant. This is about where the grapes were growing, not about the building codes.
Yes, I think you can result in someone's death without breaking any building codes. So I think that this still meets the very low bar for relevance. So I'm going to overrule the objection.
How are pesticides used at Peony Estates?
Yeah, so about the slope, we grow our grapes on a slope in the vineyards, and when we use the pesticides, we spray them at the top of the slope. And the excess pesticides tend to trickle down at the bottom, meaning the grapes at the bottom of the slope almost soak them up like a sponge. And let me tell you, if you drink a wine made from grapes grown at the bottom of the slope, you're practically sleeping with the koalas, mate. That's why we usually toss them.
What do you mean by usually toss them?
So I'm the one who normally oversees the harvest. And when I'm in charge, I make sure all my employees are following specific safety precautions. But back in 2018, I went back to Australia just to visit some family. So I wasn't there to oversee the harvest.
And what's important about the 2018 harvest?
Yeah, so in 2018, they were harvesting the grapes for the 2019 Cora wine. And because I wasn't there, I wasn't able to oversee it, but I'm sure everyone took the necessary safety precautions.
And what are the necessary safety precautions?
I usually personally train our employees on how to store and use the bug-off pesticides because, mate, that stuff is super poisonous. I'm really careful about how close we keep the pesticides from the wine area as well.
Why are you careful about that specifically?
Well, mate, pesticides are super dangerous. There's been a history of people putting pesticides closer to the wine, so I take really extra cautious, careful. I'm really careful about this now.
In your time knowing Harper Martini, have you ever witnessed her act in a way that would be considered bad for business?
Objection, Your Honor. Improper character evidence.
Explain.
The opposing counsel is trying to establish that Harper not acting in a way that would be bad for business on one occasion would then affect another occasion, which is what leading up to Genesis Petrio's death.
Response.
This is not showing conformity therewith. Rather, it is just showing whether or not the witness is aware of any instances about whether or not the defendant has asked, whether or not the defendant has acted in a certain way. So this is not showing conformity therewith.
Because it goes to this witness's awareness.
Yes.
How is this witness's awareness relevant to today's case?
This witness's awareness is relevant to today's case because it goes straight to the second prong of battery, which is intent. If Harper Martini cares so much about her business and loves her business, she would never put her business in danger by committing this alleged act.
I'm going to sustain the objection. The witness's awareness versus the actual fact you're talking about are two different things.
Yes, Your Honor. And did Harper ever hurt anyone in your experience?
From what I'd seen working at the estates, no.
Objection, Your Honor. Improper character evidence.
Response.
This is not showing improper character evidence. We're just simply asking if they did. They can clearly say no, they can clearly say yes.
Sustained.
In your experience working with Harper Martini, how did they treat their son?
Objection, Your Honor. Improper character evidence.
Sustained.
What was your relationship with Harper Martini?
I mentioned a little bit earlier, but Harper and I have known each other for years. And, personally, just between us, she's always just treated me like another family member. And so she's just been so supportive and loving towards me.
And what was Harper's relationship with others?
From what I've seen at the estates, with her employees and with her family, she'd always been the same way.
Objection, Your Honor. Improper character evidence.
Counsel, can you tell me how this is relevant? If it's not going to say she's nice, if it's not some version of she would never do this, how is it relevant?
This is simply going towards, once again, the second prong of defense, which is her intent. If she does not act in a way that would make her, if she would not, pardon, may I take a moment?
Yes, briefly.
This is simply going to both her actions before and the day of. This is not necessarily all in the past. We are also talking about the night of. So how did she treat people the night of the specific wedding reception?
Yeah, even the night of, I think she treats people well, treats people not well. I don't think that ties in any way except for as character evidence. If you want to talk about, yeah, so I'm going to sustain the objection.
Yes, Your Honor. Did you see Harper with pesticides the day of the wedding reception?
No, I don't believe so.
No further questions.
Cross-examination.
Miss Lewis, you were not there on the night of the rehearsal dinner, correct?
No, I wasn't there at the rehearsal.
You wouldn't have been able to tell if Harper Martini had any pesticides that night, correct?
No, I don't believe so.
All right, here's my next question. So Harper was familiar with where pesticides were stored?
Yeah, she was familiar. I mean, she was the owner of
pesticide have
Question, I asked that the attorney allow my witness to respond.
Yes, objection sustained.
Sorry, Your Honor. I'll slow down. I'm talking a bit fast. I apologize. Harper was familiar with where pesticides were stored.
Yeah, I mean, Harper was the owner of Peony Estates, so she had a pretty good recollection of where everything was stored and maintained.
Okay. And Harper had access to pesticides and wine at any time before the rehearsal dinner.
I mean, I think as any owner would, they would be able to go into parts of the winery and the estates and check out what they needed to check out and make sure everything was in order for the wedding.
All right. So that's a yes. Was that a yes?
Yeah, she had access to wine and pesticides, yeah.
Now you are aware that Genesis and Casey got engaged in 2018, correct?
Yeah, I'm aware of that, yeah.
And Cara wine, which is a 2019 wine, was fermenting through 2018 to 2019, correct?
Yeah, the wine, we produced the wine a year in advance, yeah.
So Harper had access to both Cara wine and pesticides between 2018 and 2019, the time of Genesis.
Objection compound.
Maybe you try to keep your question a little bit shorter, but I'm going to overrule the objection.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'm going to re-ask the question. So Harper, as an employee of Peony Estates, had access to both pesticide and the Cara wine from the time in 2018 when Genesis and Casey got engaged, all the way up until the time of the rehearsal dinner.
Well, yeah. Cara wine was a relatively new wine, so.
So she had access. Is that a yes? I'm sorry to cut you off, but is that a yes or no to my question?
Yeah, she had she had access to the wines and pesticides, yeah.
All right. Now, Harper knows that pesticide can be both poisonous and fatal.
Yeah, the pesticide.
Objection speculation.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
Midland's case law, Vir Lando, establishes that all of the agents of a business know the exact details of all of their workers, even if they were explicitly explained to them or not. And being that Harper Martini is the owner of Peony Estates, and Austin Lewis knows that pesticides can be poisonous and fatal, according to that case law, Harper Martini knows that pesticides can be fatal and poisonous.
What page is this case law on?
I'm giving you 1 second. It is page 6.
And what's the case law?
Vir Lando Manufacturing Company.
Give me a second to read it.
All right.
Response from Ms. Chapel.
In the case law, it talks about it being reasonably expected. This is specific information about Harper. This is not about the business, and this is not about a corporation. So this is very detailed, very specific, and it is not reasonably expected for Austin to have this sort of knowledge.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Briefly. And tie your response to how this witness, tie your response to how this witness would not be speculating by saying this.
Well, being that, as Austin has already said, they were over the spraying of pesticide, they established that pesticide can be dangerous. So they've already expressed that they know that pesticide have some danger, and that danger is the fact that it is poisonous and fatal. And then according to the case law, being that Austin Lewis is an agent of Harper Martini, being that the owner of Peony Estates, Harper Martini knows.
Okay, I'm going to overrule the objection. And
Yes,
we
Your Honor.
need to, I'm going to be better about ruling quickly, and I would ask both teams to be moderate in when you object.
Okay. Now, in the time before the rehearsal dinner, Harper repeatedly told you that she hated Genesis.
Yeah. I always knew that, after what Happy had said, they didn't really get along that well.
All right. And in that time before the rehearsal dinner, but at the time that Harper had access to both pesticide and the Cara wine, Harper said that if she could push a button and make Genesis disappear, she absolutely would.
I'm sorry, could you specify which time frame you're talking about?
The time in which Genesis was Casey's fiance after they were engaged.
Okay. That sounds kind of familiar.
But is that a yes to my question? Did Harper say that?
I believe so.
And that is the same Harper that had access to pesticides and the Cara wine.
Yeah.
Before the rehearsal dinner.
Yes.
Your Honor, I passed the witness.
Character evidence, improper character evidence. Pursuant to Rule 4, may I be heard? Pursuant to Rule 404B, this is showing conformity therewith because they had access to these pesticides at one point. That means they must have used them at another. This is improper character evidence. It does not show. This shows conformity therewith.
May I respond very, very briefly, Your Honor, very
No, I'm
briefly.
going to overrule the objection, and you can take this up in your questioning if you would like, Ms. Shaw.
Yes, Your Honor.
I pass the witness, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
At this time, no. We simply ask that our witness be allowed to leave the stand.
Yes, you may step down, Ms. Lewis. And just to clarify, all loss is still at 10 p.m., right?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. So we have our final defense witness here.
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Harper Martini to the stand.
Proceed.
Please introduce yourself to the court.
Well, my name is Harper Martini.
Now, you've heard a lot of accusations today, but I just want to get it out there. Did you poison Genesis?
Oh my goodness, no, never. Genesis was going to join our family. Also, our life is just so precious.
Now, I want to take you back a little bit. Who is Casey?
Well, Casey's my baby boy. I raised him ever since his poor daddy's passing, and he grew up at Peony Estates as I grew my business, and I love him. I raised him.
And what was Casey's childhood like?
Well, he was always so funny, running around, going to school plays, always an active little boy. He's always very curious and so smart.
Now I want to move on and talk about Genesis. Who is Genesis to you?
Well, I met Genesis a few months after I found out that she and my baby boy were dating, and they soon got engaged and they would be married. So, of course, when I found out that they were going to be married, that I had to host it over at Peony Estates. If Genesis was going to join our family, then it needs to be at the Estates.
Now you mentioned this Peony Estates. What is that?
Well, that's my winery, of course. I've grown it to include Casey and I and our employees and all of our business partners. We produce wine and we're growing. We're on track to be top in the country.
Now you mentioned Genesis and this family. What were your thoughts on that?
Well, I did have a couple of hesitations at first, but I really grew to see the love and compassion that I saw Genesis express to my son and my son to her.
Now I want to take you a little bit further. How, if at all, did your relationship with Genesis change?
Well, it took some time to work out our differences, don't get me wrong, but in about January, we were able to meet at a cute little cafe down the road and talk things over. And I think we were better off in that and got to have a better understanding of each other.
And after you were able to talk it out, did your relationship improve?
Yes, we were able to move on from the past and really focus on the wedding, making it the best that we could. We were just, as they say, burying the hatchet.
Miss Martini, how did you go about burying the hatchet?
Well, I was just so excited for the wedding. So, of course, I hired the best wedding planner I know and the best caterer and hosted it over at the winery.
Now, you mentioned this wedding. What role, if any, did you have?
Well, I helped plan it with Casey and Genesis, along with Blair Osborne, the wedding planner. And I was able to host the wedding rehearsal and just see my little baby Casey go off and grow up.
Miss Martini, just to be clear, did you want this wedding to happen?
Well, of course. Everybody's got to grow up someday. And although, yes, as a parent, it could hurt me so much to see sometimes my baby boy growing apart, it happens.
Now I want to take you to the night of the wedding rehearsal. What happened then?
Well, Casey just looked so great. in his little suit and stand next to Genesis. I was making sure though that they were leaving room for Jesus. And after giving a toast, I gave Genesis a gift, a bottle of wine, to welcome her into our family.
Just to be clear, what kind of wine was this?
Well, it was a bottle of wine crafted for Genesis with fall spices and smoked leather. And I had noticed that Genesis lacked those notes. And so Casey named that bottle of wine to mean beloved. And then I gave it to Genesis as a gift. As a matter of fact, I was planning on releasing Cara as my next year's bottle of wine for all of our customers.
Now I want to move you a little bit more forward. How did you learn about Genesis's passing?
Well, I woke up early in the morning to an employee saying first that somebody had gotten sick and ended up in the hospital. I was just worried, oh, that could be my Casey or Genesis. And later in the morning, after I saw Casey was all right, I was worried that could be Genesis. And then Angel came in just looking awful. And that's when I was worried it was Genesis, and I found out later that it was. It was just so terrible.
Miss Martini, would you ever hurt Genesis?
Oh my goodness, no. Genesis was going to be part of my family. She loved my Casey, and my Casey loved her. I would never.
At this time, we have no further questions.
Cross.
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Miss Martini. I'm going to be asking you a few questions today. I want to start with talking about Genesis Petrillo. You talked a lot about her on direct, but initially you didn't like her very much, did you?
Well, it came as a surprise to me that my Casey was going out even.
Miss Martini, that's not an answer to my question. You didn't like Genesis when you originally met her, did you?
I had some disagreements, yes.
Because Casey is the love of your life?
I raised Casey, yes.
Your only family?
Yes, my poor husband died so early.
Casey is incredibly important to you.
Yes, it's my baby boy.
And you thought that Jen Petrillo was a bad influence on your baby boy, didn't you?
Genesis had gotten my Casey sick one time, and after that, as any mother would, I was on guard, yes.
So that's a yes to my question. You thought that Jen Petrillo was not a good influence on your favorite person in the whole world.
For a while, yes.
In fact, Miss Martini, on May 11th, Genesis Petrillo left you a voicemail. Didn't she? You would recognize this voicemail if it were shown to you in court today?
Yes, I do believe so.
Your Honor, permission to share and publish Exhibit 8, which has already been admitted into evidence?
Yes.
Miss Martini, in that voicemail, you found out that that Jen Petrillo was going to move your child across the world.
They were going to move to France, yes.
And in that voicemail, Jen Petrillo told you that you would die alone and never see Casey again.
It was some awful words, yes.
That made you pretty angry.
I was disheartened, yes.
In fact, you told Jen Petrillo that not even moving to France could save her from your wrath.
I was angry at the time. Yes, I did say that.
Thank you, bailiff. You can take it down. Now, Miss Martini, you didn't keep your dislike of Genesis Petrillo to yourself, did you?
Objection to relevance, Your Honor. May I be heard?
Briefly.
Yes, Your Honor. Whether or not Miss Martini shared her thoughts and feelings with other people makes no fact in today's case more or less probable. It bears no relevance on whether or not she actually took this action. These are her feelings.
Brief response.
Your Honor, I'm laying foundation for an exhibit, which is a voicemail in which she expresses intent to harm Jen Petrillo, a direct element of this case.
Objection overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Miss Martini, yes or no, you left voicemails for Danny Francasio?
Oh, Danny, yes.
You would recognize these voicemails if they were shown to you in court today?
It was a while ago, but I do believe I would.
Your Honor, permission to share exhibits 18A through E. Ms. Martini, these are the specific voicemails that you left Jen Petrillo, specifically D and E.
To Jen, I'm sorry, those are to
To
Danny.
Danny Brancazio, excuse me. These are the transcripts of those voicemails.
I see one, yes. Oh, there the other, yes.
These are fair and accurate copies,
Yes,
and they have not been changed or altered in any way.
not that I can see, no.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff offers exhibits D and E into evidence.
Any
Your
objections?
Honor? Yes, Your Honor. If I may, per your previous ruling, past events, opposing counsel is attempting to use this to show conformity therewith. I object to improper character evidence. Per your previous rulings, these past events that are not related to the specific day in question or even the specific night in question would be using Ms. Martini's past thoughts and feelings to show that she would act in the same way on that night in question.
Response, Your Honor? We've established that Ms. Martini had access to both the wine and the pesticides all throughout 2019. Both of these voicemails are within the time frame of she could have sent the voicemail and immediately gone and poisoned Jen Petrillo. We are not saying she put the poison in the bottle necessarily on the night in question, but it could have been at any point. Therefore, these are not character evidence, but actually specifically go towards her intent to put that wine in the bottle.
I'm going to overrule the objection. Goes to motive.
Yes, Your Honor.
Your Honor, with that, are exhibits 18D and E admitted into evidence?
They're admitted.
Now, Ms. Martini, on January 4th, 2019, you said you'd pay $1 million for a pesticide that killed Genesis Petrillo.
I was sad, yes.
And moving on to 18E, on May 15th, just 4 days after you heard that voicemail that Jen was taking your loved one away, you said, "I'm at a breaking point. It's going to be me or Genesis, but not both of us."
I would say yes.
Thank you, bailiff. You can take the exhibit down. Now, you talked about your peace plan on direct examination, and that was to give Genesis Petrillo a bottle of Cara wine.
Yes, it was a gift into the family.
This was the only bottle of Cara wine in existence?
Well, yes, I was going to release it later to sell to my customers.
And Miss Martini, before you bottled this wine, you actually tried it, correct?
Yes, I did.
So you consumed the wine before it went in the bottle?
Well, yes, I need to make sure that the car was ready.
And you didn't become sick from pesticide poisoning?
Well, no.
Now, that bottle of Cara wine for Genesis Petrillo, it was for Genesis and Genesis alone?
At the rehearsal dinner, I gave it to Genesis, but I was to release it later in the upcoming months.
You're aware that the inside of that bottle tested positive for organophosphate pesticides?
I did hear that later, yes.
In fact, you found this bottle in Miss Petrillo's room the night after the rehearsal dinner, and you threw it away, didn't you?
Well, it was on the ground, so yes, I did put it in the trash.
And you proceeded to dump all of the 2019 Cara wine so you couldn't test it for pesticides.
Well, it was empty on the ground, and so I did put it in the trash, yes.
I'm sorry, Miss Martini, let me be more clear. You dumped every other ounce of Cara wine produced after the rehearsal dinner, correct?
Oh, well, I found out about what happened to poor Genesis, and I was worried that something could have been wrong with the rest, so of course I couldn't sell it.
That's the rest of the wine that you did try yourself and not become sick? You're worried something was wrong with that wine?
They had no idea what could have happened with Genesis, so I couldn't let that go to my customers.
Miss Martini, that's a yes to my question. You had sampled the wine and not become sick, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
But you claim you threw it out because you were worried it would make people sick.
With what we don't know, yes.
Now, Miss Martini, the Cara wine wasn't actually your only peace plan with Genesis, was it?
Well, I wanted to make good with Genesis. Yes.
But actually, in May of 2019, you gave Genesis Petrillo a note, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
You'd recognize that note if it were shown to you in court today?
I do believe.
Your Honor, permission to share Exhibit 24. Ms. Petrillo, this is the note that you wrote to Genesis Petrillo.
Yes, ma'am.
It has not been changed or altered in any way.
No.
And just to be clear for the jury, this is your handwriting?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff offers Exhibit 24 into evidence.
Any
I'm
objections?
sorry, Your Honor. No, Your Honor, we actually would like to use this as well.
All right. Submitted.
Now, Ms. Martini, in this note, you tell Genesis you'll give them $300,000 to leave Casey.
I scraped together that money. Yes, I did.
And you said, if you don't, I will take you out the hard way.
I did write that in the note, yes.
You told Ms. Petrillo that she had until June 7th.
Yes, the day of the wedding. Now, you see,
Martini, June 7th is the day of the rehearsal dinner, correct?
Objection, Your Honor, if I may.
Yes.
I believe opposing counsel actually misquoted what was on there. I'm sorry, the picture was very small, so I had to pull up a paper copy. It took me a second. If I may, the evidence actually says, I will take you out of the picture the hard way, not I will take you out the hard way. I asked that opposing counsel state this question and that the prior statement be stricken from the record so that it shows what's accurately on the picture.
Yeah, this objection is a bit untimely, and the witness said she could see this if she wanted to disagree with opposing counsel's characterization, but ultimately the jury can see this fine, so I'm going to overrule it.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Martini, June 7th is the night of the rehearsal dinner.
yes, the day before the wedding.
And June 7th is the night that Genesis Petrillo was rushed to the hospital and the next day ultimately died from organophosphate poisoning. Is that correct?
Objection, Your Honor, to improper opinion. May I be heard?
I'm going to overrule that objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Martini, June 7th is the same day that Genesis Petrillo was rushed to the hospital where she later died from organophosphate pesticide poisoning, correct?
She was rushed to the hospital, unfortunately.
Is that a yes to my question?
Yes.
Pass the witness, Your Honor.
Can you redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Before I begin, may I inquire as to how much time we have remaining?
222, 217, somewhere around there.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Martini, how could pesticides have gotten in the bottle?
Well, there's a couple ways, as Austin Lewis earlier was talking about, is there's pesticides all around. Unfortunately, there are bugs around and we do need to spray just for the safety of our guests and customers. And so, and it's in the trash and with our routine sprayings that we do around the estates, there's a number of ways.
You mentioned routine spraying. Spraying of what?
Well, spraying of the pesticides so that there weren't any pests around. I mean, those little critters, they're so small, they can get in the tiniest of little places.
To your knowledge, did anyone spray inside the wine cellar?
Inside the wine cellar, yeah. I'm sorry. There was a lot going on with the wedding and everything. I'm not completely sure.
No worries. Do you know if anyone sprayed the bottling area with pesticides?
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance, may I be heard?
Yes.
It's specifically in the complaint of today's case that there was an investigation if Peony Estates' use of pesticides within their buildings violated building code, which would say it created cross-contamination, and it was ruled that they did not. And none of their routine behaviors violated that building code, therefore asking Ms. Martini whether or not the use of pesticide in the building was possibly a cause for cross-contamination is irrelevant and improper.
Your Honor, may I respond to that?
Briefly.
If I could direct the court's attention to the pretrial order that I believe opposing counsel is referring to, we can discuss the proper routines and practices as long as it's not solely going to the case of negligence per se. If I may, Your Honor, our alternative case theory that you ruled on earlier includes the use of pesticides in regards to the vineyard as well as around the peony estates. I'm simply trying to establish whether or not someone else or some other way the pesticides could have gotten inside wine and that it was not an act by the defendant, Harper Martini.
Brief response.
Yes, Your Honor. The pretrial order specifically states if it's going to something like accident, which would be a one-time misuse. One time someone accidentally misused it. But to say that their entire practices, which have been thoroughly investigated, cause cross-contamination would be going directly to negligence per se and has already been investigated and excluded.
Yeah. The way I read the pretrial order is, things that would only go to negligence per se, but there's plenty of stuff in the Venn diagram that could support both theories. And so, no, I'm going to overrule the objection. I don't read the pretrial order to be excluding this type of evidence.
Yes, Your Honor.
To your knowledge, Ms. Martini, which of your, to your knowledge, Ms. Martini, who had access to pesticides?
Objection, Your Honor, outside the scope of my cross-examination.
I'm going to overrule that.
Ms. Martini, who had access to pesticides?
Well, all of our number of employees around the estates.
And to your knowledge, did they use them?
Well, yes, they had to spray.
Did they use them close to the time of the wedding?
Yes, we had a couple of small issues, so we wanted to make sure that everything was perfectly safe.
And the car of wine was at Peony Estates at the time?
Yes.
Now, earlier you were asked about those voicemails to Danny. How were you feeling specifically about Genesis during the wedding rehearsal?
Well, during the wedding rehearsal, I was really excited for Genesis to come join our family. Before I was, yes, hurt by some of the things that she had said, but honestly, I was so excited.
So would you ever hurt Genesis?
Oh, goodness, no. Life is so precious. I don't know anyone who would do such a thing.
No further questions. I believe there's no recross time. We ask that this witness be allowed to step down.
You can step down, Ms. Martini. So how much time from the timekeepers is left for the two closers?
We
How
have
much
about
time do
15 minutes of time remaining.
Say that again?
About 15 minutes, roughly, a little bit over that, or a little bit under that, rather.
Okay, then we should be good. Let's take do we need 1 minute break?
Your Honor, the plaintiff is ready to proceed.
If plaintiff's ready to proceed, they're first up. Let's just go forward with plaintiff closing, and we should be all good with all lost. So you can take your full allotted time.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court. I will make you disappear. Members of the jury, these are the words of the defendant in today's case to Genesis Petrillo. And while Genesis Petrillo might no longer be with us, to those who loved her, she will never truly disappear. She will live on in their memories as a beloved sister, friend, and fiance. But despite what the defense would have you believe, there was one person in today's case who did not love Genesis, who felt threatened by Genesis, and who wanted to make Genesis disappear. And that person is the defendant, Harper Martini. Now, to hold Miss Martini liable for her actions today, my co-counsel and I are here on behalf of Miss Petrillo's estate, suing the defendant for civil battery, which in the state of Midlands consists of 3 elements: an act on the part of the defendant, an intention to cause harmful or offensive contact, and harmful or offensive contact to the plaintiff. And as this is a civil case, we must prove those 3 elements to you by a preponderance of the evidence, which means that our explanation is more likely than not, or as Mr. Turner put it at the beginning of today's case, that 51% certainty. And I want to walk you through each of those elements and show you how we proved them to you today. We heard from Angel Rodriguez that Harper Martini, the defendant, had pesticides on the night in question and was near the Cara wine. We heard from multiple witnesses, including the defendant himself, that Cara wine was for Genesis and Genesis alone. And members of the jury, Austin Lewis told you that Harper Martini had access to both the Cara wine and the pesticides for the entirety of 2019. Now we know, based on the testing of that bottle, that it had pesticides in it. And members of the jury, the reasonable explanation here is that act by the defendant. That's the explanation the evidence supports. That's an act. Moving on to intent, we heard from Casey Soto, the defendant's own son, that he believed his mother capable of this act if she felt she needed to do it to protect him. But who better to tell us about the defendant's intent than the defendant herself? We heard multiple witnesses recount statements from Harper Martini saying, "I would make Genesis disappear." She told us she would buy a pesticide for Genesis Petrillo. She'd pay $1 million. And members of the jury, she wrote Genesis Petrillo a note that said, "If you are not out of my daughter's life by June 7th, I will take you out the hard way." And members of the jury, the defendant followed through. Now, lastly, we needed to prove harmful contact to Jen Petrillo. Jen is not with us today, and that is for one reason and one reason alone. As Dr. Kwan testified, all of the medical evidence pointed to organophosphate pesticide poisoning, the same type of poisoning used at Peony Estates, the same type of poison Miss Petrillo knew was lethal, and the same type of poison that on the night in question, Miss Petrillo was seen handling by Angel Rodriguez. Now, the defense would have you believe there's an alternate explanation. They brought up Dr. Cannon, who told you that there were a lot of other things, but I want to remind you of something specific he said. I actually wrote it down. When asked by Mr. Turner about whether the other explanations were most likely, he said, "They're not as likely as pesticide poisoning, but they're possible." Members of the jury, our burden today is to prove what was most likely, and the defense's own expert agreed with us. Further, Miss Martini and Miss Lewis would have you believe that the defendant or that the victim was poisoned by accidental cross-contamination, but the defendant herself told you that she drank that very same Cara wine and did not become sick, which means members of the jury, that poison got in the bottle after Miss Petrillo had bottled it. No amount of money will bring Genesis Petrillo back to those who loved her. But in holding the defendant accountable today, we can assure that Genesis's death was not in vain. Members of the jury, contrary to what the defense would have you believe, the burden in today's case is not by a preponderance of the suggestions or by a preponderance of the possibilities, but it is by a preponderance of the evidence. And when you consider the totality of the testimony and evidence presented to you here today, you will see that we have met our burden, and we ask that you find the defendant liable for civil battery. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Blank. Closing for the defense.
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, Ms. Blank, members of the jury, may it please the court. Family comes first. On June 8th, 2019, Genesis Petrillo passed away. This was the morning of Miss Petrillo and Mr. Soto's wedding. This was a celebration of their love and one of family. Now, Genesis's death was a tragedy, and the loss of family hurts. Miss Blank is right. No amount of money can bring Genesis Petrillo back. But when we're hurt, we try and find a reason. We place blame. We must not be blinded by our pain. We need to look past it to find the truth. And the truth in today's case is that Miss Martini did not poison Miss Petrillo and had no intention of poisoning Miss Petrillo. Now, in the law, to find the truth, the plaintiff has the burden of proof. And their burden is by a preponderance of the evidence, meaning more likely than not. But what the plaintiff has failed to mention is that the scales do not start off equal. To help explain what this means, I'd like you to imagine this bottle. The plaintiff has the burden to fill this bottle up. They have to fill it with witnesses, evidence, and proof. And the law says that they must fill this bottle up to more than 50%. If the plaintiff does not reach more than half, Miss Martini is not liable. If they miss a single drop of wine, Miss Martini is not liable. Even if the plaintiff meets exactly 50%, Miss Martini is still not liable. And the plaintiff must meet this burden for each of the elements. In today's case, there's 3 elements to battery. First, they have to prove that this was an act by Miss Martini. Second, they have to prove that Miss Martini intended to cause harmful contact. And third, they had to prove that Miss Petrillo was harmed. The plaintiff must prove each of these by that standard, more likely than not. Today, the plaintiff has failed to meet their burden. Miss Martini did not poison Miss Petrillo, had no intent to poison Miss Petrillo. You heard from witnesses we brought, but we'll break it down by element. First, you heard from Dr. Cannon. Dr. Cannon testified to missing gaps in the plaintiff's case. You heard Dr. Kwan talk about it themselves. They didn't test for allergies. They didn't look for those underlying conditions. We don't even know the peak alcohol content for Miss Petrillo. Now, Dr. Cannon explained not 1, 2, or 3, but 4 other theories about how this tragedy could have occurred. Miss Petrillo was not poisoned by Miss Martini. It could have been the liver disease. It could have been alcohol poisoning. She could have had an allergic reaction. The expert explained that there's just too many unknowns. You also heard from Austin Lewis, a member of the family at Peony Estates. You heard her testify to those grapes that were grown at the bottom of the slope, concentrated with the pesticides used. Those were the ones that were used in the wine. That could have been something that led to Miss Petrillo's death, not an act by Miss Martini. Finally, you heard from Miss Martini herself. She testified to moving past the differences and burying the hatchet. She never meant for Genesis to be hurt. She had no intention to hurt Genesis. You heard from her herself. She said she wanted this wedding to occur. She put in money. She spent time. She helped in the planning. Why would she help in the planning if she wanted Genesis, the fiance, dead? No wedding would have happened. Now let's talk about the intent. The plaintiff tried to bring these audio descriptions and voicemails, but those didn't happen the night of the wedding. In fact, you never heard about an eyewitness. Not a single witness the plaintiff brought today testified to seeing Miss Petrillo put any pesticides in the wine. Angel Rodriguez, someone who was at the wedding rehearsal and interacted with Miss Martini, she didn't mention Miss Martini with pesticides. Casey Soto, Miss Martini's own son, never mentioned those pesticides. Our own witnesses, Austin Lewis, they never mentioned seeing Harper spraying pesticides. Now finally, let's talk about the third element that Miss Blank mentioned, harmful contact to Miss Petrillo. You never heard a witness testify to Harper hurting Genesis. You never heard any violent interactions. In fact, we don't actually know what Miss Petrillo died from. Why? Because their own witness, you'll see this when you go back to deliberate. This is the alcohol impairment chart. Their own witness, as well as the blood alcohol content, said that incontinence was not a symptom of alcohol poisoning, but members of the jury, if you look at this chart yourself, you'll see that it is. I want to take a moment to share a story that my mentor once told me. Once upon a time, there was a king with a beautiful kingdom and an even more beautiful baby daughter. One day when he returned from hunting, he found his baby was missing. The cradle was overturned. He saw his loyal dog with a blood-smeared mouth. The king immediately rushed to blame the dog, drew his sword, and killed the dog. After hearing a dying yelp from the dog, he turned to see his baby daughter unharmed, underneath the cradle, next to a dead snake. The king realized the snake had tried to attack the child, and it was actually his loyal dog who had killed the snake. Members of the jury, we cannot make the same mistake the king made. You heard the plaintiff talk about, and I wrote this down, I found it so interesting, that our story would be fantastical and creative, that we would not be sticking to the facts. But members of the jury, let's talk about what we heard. It was the plaintiff who wasn't sticking to the facts. Angel Rodriguez, their star witness who was at the wedding rehearsal, lost count of the number of drinks they had. They actually came in contact with the same wine that Genesis Petrillo drank, but they weren't sick. You also heard from Casey Soto. They themselves, the Harper Martini's own son, said that they don't believe that their mother, Harper Martini, could have done something like this. Now, we can't be making assumptions today, but the plaintiff is asking you to assume. But we can't assume because we didn't hear it. And we didn't hear it because it didn't happen. The plaintiff has tried to twist this mother's love. Don't let them be the one poisoning this family. They have not met their burden of proof. There's countless holes in their story, and a disagreement does not mean murder. No one saw pesticide being put in the wine. There's no proof that Carl wine, the wine that was gifted, contained pesticides, just a bottle. In a few moments, you'll be asked to go back to deliberate. You'll review the facts that have been brought forth. I ask that you look past the pain of tragedy and not be quick to blame. Look at the facts to find true justice for Miss Petrillo. The truth is, Miss Martini did not poison Genesis Petrillo. Find her not liable. Thank you.
Thank you. Rebuttal?
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Miss Tsai just came before you and she told you family comes first. And members of the jury, we agree that Harper Martini put her family above all else. But as we heard today, Casey Soto, her son, was the love of her life. And she believed that Jen Petrillo would take Casey away from her and never let her see Casey again. Members of the jury, Harper Martini prioritized family, but to Harper, Genesis Petrillo was not her family. Now, I want to talk about the three explanations that Ms. Tsai provided you. First, that there was another cause for the death. We heard from the defense's own witnesses that all of those causes were less likely than pesticide poisoning. By a preponderance of the evidence, pesticide poisoning is what killed Jen Petrillo. We heard that the slope could have caused cross-contamination, but Harper Martini told you herself she drank the wine and did not become poisoned. And lastly, we heard that Harper Martini loved Genesis and was prepared to bury the hatchet. But members of the jury, we have Harper's own words a month before the wedding saying, "Leave Casey or I will take you out the hard way." That's not love. Now, I want to talk about specifically what a preponderance of the evidence means. We know from the doctor's examination that Jen Petrillo had pesticide in her system. We've heard from multiple witnesses that the bottle in question had pesticides inside of it. Members of the jury, those are facts in today's case. And when you go back in that deliberation room, you are tasked with using the evidence presented in court here today to reach a verdict of the most likely explanation. We don't have to say we saw Harper with the pesticide, but if that's the most likely explanation, then we've met our burden. And at the end of the day, when you consider all the evidence, you will see that the defense has nothing but speculation and guessing because their client does not want to be held liable. But just because it is difficult for Miss Martini does not mean it is the correct thing to do. Hold her liable. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. I have submitted my ballot. Let me submit my comments here. Good job, everybody.
Do you know if it's possible to stop the recording, or are we going to record the feedback as well? Or live stream the feedback?
I have a button right here that says stop live stream, which